Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the October 15th meeting of the Vermont Climate Council Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee meeting. This is the best week of the year, so welcome everyone. We are going to meet from 9 to 12 today, and our agenda generally, where did it go? Sorry, here it is. Our agenda consists of some administrative work in the beginning, some updates from the Climate Council meeting earlier this week, a block of time to work on our prioritization exercise of our matrix, some public comment, a discussion with, I believe, Kaya related to the equity screen process and some work on that front. Then initial discussion of the carbon budget that was prepared for the council by consultants that members of this group had some support and oversight of. And then we'll talk about our next steps here again from the public and adjourn at noon. So any subcommittee comments on that agenda or the meeting minutes from last week?
Billy, on the equity screen, I want to check with Jane, but I think Kaya's coming next week. I don't think she's doing it this week. So I think it gives us more time to prioritize this morning, I think. But Jane and Marion, if you could just weigh in on that.
Yeah, I'm actually just asking Jane because I'm not sure. I mean, equity screen, yes, the expectation is that Kaya would do it next week with you all. I wasn't sure if you were expecting her to come and just speak about it or do a presentation today. So
I don't know. I put this on the agenda based on input, I think, from Jane, so we can kind of figure it out.
Yeah, when we get there, we'll see where we're at.
Okay. So notwithstanding that potential variable later in the morning, everyone good with the minutes from last week and this week's agenda? Okay, seeing some thumbs up and blank stares, so we'll consider those all approved. So first agenda item is an update from the Climate Council meeting. Are we expecting Jane for that, Marion?
I would think so, but she's not here. She may be on a meeting that's running late. I can give a brief update. I just have to refamiliarize
she
myself.
Just wrote and said she'll be on call at 10. So I guess that means joining us at 10. I don't know what that means.
Marion, maybe do you have a...
I can give a quick rundown. I don't know if it will be as good as what Jane would do. So council met on Tuesday. There were a number of items on the agenda. The first was discussing and approving the decision-making protocol for the council. And so this was discussed at a previous council meeting and reviewed and edited by the steering committee. There were a couple of changes made and then it was approved by the council. And the largest changes included removing a section that talked about councilors' ability to table items. There was a lot of concern about where that came from. So that section was just struck from the decision-making protocol, as well as the steering committee agreed that for subcommittees, if there was ever any question of what to elevate to the council, all subcommittees would have a vote in what gets elevated to the council. And that was a change from what was previously stated, which I believe stated just council members on subcommittee would have ability to vote. So that was a change as well. So that's posted online and was approved by the council. The council got a presentation of the non-energy sector draft actions from the non-energy sector cross-sector task lead. That was a holdover from the previous week as we ran over with our other cross-sector presentations. Council also discussed the greenhouse gas inventory and associated recommendations and got a presentation both from Jared Duvall with Science and Data, as well as Ryan Patch, and Ryan's on here. So Ryan, feel free to jump in on this particular item as you have a lot more knowledge around this one. And then we reviewed and walked through the process for the first 4 draft sections of the climate action plan. There was a lot of discussion around process and how comments will be received and reviewed by the draft authors of sections, and then coming back to approval for the council. I believe Jane will be sending out today a revised CAP drafting guidance document Folks should have seen that previously. It talked about, what font and format to use if you're drafting sections of the CAP, as well as how to format the action tables that go into the climate action plan. We've added a section around how comments get received and reviewed. And there was a lot of discussion at the council meeting about ensuring that draft authors also get CC'd on comments as they're sent in, including myself and Jane. And so that's an added component in the CAP drafting guidance and will be shared today. So when folks are sending in comments on draft sections of the CAP, which are due either written the morning of the council meeting at which those draft sections will be reviewed, or verbally at the council meeting, send them to myself and Jane, as well as the draft authors of the climate action plan section that you're referring to. And all of that is captured both in the CAP drafting guidance as well as in the climate action plan outline, which you all have seen before. That's been revised to very clearly state who the authors of the sections are, as well as what dates those sections are due to be posted for council review. So you don't have to jump back and forth between that timeline document that you all have seen before. So that's been combined into one document and will be shared today. So those were the changes made, and we reviewed this section of the CAP, and there was some discussion around comments and sort of how those will be incorporated. So it was a good first test run of how we're going to continue to be reviewing draft sections of the CAP as we move forward. Ryan or anybody else, is there anything you want to add on the greenhouse gas inventory and recommendations discussion? I think you all could speak to it a lot better than I could. Or Alyssa or anyone who's there.
This is Alyssa here. I can just say that Ryan did an excellent job. And I think he really showed the whole council that he especially and our group knows what we're talking about, and our recommendations were accepted and adopted. And I believe there will be an RFP that reflects the our goals. But I would just say Ryan did a really great job. And if you didn't catch the short presentation, it's worth watching.
Great.
Thanks. I heard my name, but wasn't sure if there was a question. I had to take another call. I apologize. But I'm back.
Oh, that's all right, Ryan. Just if you wanted to fill in any updates from the council meeting, specifically around the greenhouse gas inventory and associated recommendations conversation from Tuesday, but Alyssa gave a good overview as well.
Leave it to Alyssa then. We can have opportunity to talk about it a bit more, as it in some ways can help support the work that's happened with the carbon budget. That next step of how to extend some of the research and work that's happened in that space. So definitely an area topic might happen today.
Great. So that's it. Anything else from counselors or other folks that were at the council meeting? I know I brushed over a lot, I think.
Thanks, Marion. Lauren, Abby, counselors, any additional input? Okay. All right. Great. Well, let's see. What do we have up next?
The work.
All right. So I guess, Pat, should we hand it over to you?
Sure. So let me kind of explain where we're at with this spreadsheet that's sent out, and then Abby has a few words to say too. So first of all, I think what different people filled out not everyone filled out every action or every tab in our matrix of things. I want to be clear, people did their very best, but they didn't feel they could rank, they just didn't. So I'm going to kind of go through, I just want to talk about kind of what this thing should mean and probably not mean as we dive into it. And we'll talk about how to dive into it in just a second. So what I did is I took everyone's individual rankings and looked at the last column where it gave a total ranking, right? Because I started to try to do all the rankings for everything. And then I realized I'd be up until 5 this morning and I would have lots of operator error. So I didn't do that. So I took the final ranking. Some people had forgot to put technical feasibility in, so it messed up their final rankings. So in some cases, because everyone seemed to say yes to technical ranking, we didn't include anything that didn't seem technically feasible. So I just put yes for those folks who left it blank, so the score would come out right, according to their other rankings, just to let you know. So there are a few things, I certainly did this last night and this morning early because I got a late entry. So there could be operator error on my part. So I want to recognize the spreadsheet is imperfect and it's a tool to think with, not the answer. I think because not everyone filled out everything, sometimes like land use got a lot of attention, by the way. There were probably 7 or 8 folks who filled it out, but some only got like 2 or 3 people. So just note it's a kind of different level of focus. Doesn't mean one's better than the other. It was just different. I did color code things just to draw things out, but don't also overread into the color coding. when I did this and looked at it afterward, there were things that came across high by everybody. I think that's telling. That gives us some priorities that we pretty much probably have agreement on. Maybe we can just acknowledge that and not have to spend a lot of time. There were some things that actually got medium or high. And so we just need to decide whether they're good enough to include or they just stay in the spreadsheet. We don't elevate them necessarily to quote unquote the report. And then there were several things that got, if I had 2 or more highs, but then 1 low, I actually marked that in what's orange because I thought it was interesting. If we had almost all highs, but somebody said it was a low, then we have, I think, something to talk about there. Now, that being said, there are other actions in here that I know are important to people that I didn't color because they ended up with a kind of a weird mix of medium, high, and low. That doesn't mean we shouldn't elevate them. So just because there's not a color doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about them, okay? Where I think we have all lows across the board, or lows and mediums, that's maybe easier to let go. But there are things where like a really funky combination of low, medium, and high, we probably need to talk about. I didn't color those, but don't assume that we shouldn't talk about them. So I just want to be clear about that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The other thing too is, as you know, the matrix is there's still some like potential redundancy or duplicates or things we're going to maybe thinking of forwarding to others. So there's still some cleanup of the matrix, which confused things a little bit as people tried to fill this out. So just note this is still a work in progress. Okay, so those are all caveats, and I want people to use this as a tool to think with. We're going to follow the Climate Council's general direction, but ultimately it's your all's good judgment about kind of what you want to elevate and prioritize. One last thing I would just want to say about equity, and I think Lauren raised it in an email, but I think others have thought about it too, is I think the challenge of leaving equity to the high priority items at the end is it's problematic, and I'm not second guessing the steering committee, but I'm just saying that generally equity needs to be considered beginning, middle, end. And if you do that kind of screening by priority first, you can actually be inequitable. So the last thing I'd want to say is there may be things on here that don't show a high ranking, but are really, really important to equity. And if that's the case, let's talk about it and elevate them. Because equity, as we infuse it throughout our work, sometimes rubrics can actually unintentionally do things that we don't intend. So I want people to be continuing to pay attention to equity too. Abby, other things you want to say about this spreadsheet before we talk about how we're going to dive into this?
Just for clarification's sake, I guess I would say that the public version that's posted has just the transparency around the way that the rankings were received, but doesn't have names attached to the rankings, because I think there's transparency and then I think there's exposure. And so I was feeling really strongly that we needed to be transparent in the range of rankings that were there, but not attach that to specific people, because I think that goes into sort of a little bit more exposure than individuals need in their lives. So just wanting to be transparent about what is out there and what isn't. Thanks.
And what's just 2 other caveats is what a few people said to me is, look, when I saw someone else's ranking, I was like, oh, maybe they're right. So remember, these rankings are people's best guess at the moment. With discussion, they could change. And I think to Ryan, a point he sent out is, this is a qualitative, sort of a little bit of quantitative in some places, but it's not perfect. And it can be frustrating when we maybe don't feel like we have the evidence base to fully assert what we'd like to. So I just want to note this is useful for a tool to think with, but it doesn't like pop out the answer. It's not a calculus. Lauren.
Yeah, I'm just curious, before we jump in, as part of this conversation, are we just diving into those that you flagged in your different colors, Pat, or are we going to have an opportunity to provide just our feedback on how we thought it went? I mean, I sent a couple of comments, obviously, to Abby and Billy and CC to you, Pat, but I have a few critiques I think are worthy of being made, assuming that some of the same challenges I experienced were felt within the people in this Zoom room, but maybe in the other subcommittees as well.
My take is, Lauren, we probably should talk a little bit about the process first. So people should be clear about before we over prescribe this thing, people should talk about their concerns or caveats. So absolutely, in a minute, let's do that. I think it's a totally fair point. Brian.
Asking a question about, and appreciate diving into the process first. My question is related to the ultimate output of a prioritization from this subcommittee to the Climate Council. Do we have a timeline for that delivery?
Ryan, I want to talk about what we are actually trying to produce through this conversation we're about to have, and then the timeline. So timeline.
Okay.
But timeline, let's go to that first. Marion or Billy or Abby, I think, remind me when actually we have to produce both this matrix, cleaned up, and I think also potentially the draft report of our section.
Yep, so cleaned up versions of your final matrix that will have everything in it, but likely more details around those high priority actions or the medium or low that you want to elevate into the body of the CAP, as well as the actual written sections of the climate action plan that are assigned to members of your subcommittee are due to be posted online for council review on November 2nd. They will then be receiving comments throughout that week period and then reviewed at the council meeting on November 9th.
And that's November 2nd. Tuesday.
Yep. And you all are on schedule to do the equity screen with Kaya next week. And so part of your conversation today should be which of those actions do you want to do the screen with her, through the screen next week. As examples of how to do the other actions, because all of your high priority actions will have to go through the equity screen.
Let me raise one other thing about what we're trying to get to, and then I want to come back to Lauren's point. So, and Marion's is probably to you. So I think where we have, either high rankings or medium high rankings, we decide to elevate. The idea is those things end up where they end up in the actual report, because everything kind of stays in the matrix unless we decide to pull something out. But so when we're trying to prioritize, what does that actually mean, just so people are clear about what we're doing and not doing here?
Sure. So high priority actions, if you all recall and I can post it in the chat, the CAP drafting guidance, there's a section for resilience and adaptation in natural and working lands, I think is the title, as well as sequestration and then agricultural emissions under mitigation. Those are sections in the climate action plan that will have all of your pathways, all of your strategies written in a paragraph for each, sort of expanding on those pathways and strategies, and then a table of all of your high priority actions that you all as a subcommittee agree should be actually included in the body of the climate action plan. Within those, sort of the table of high priority actions, you'll have a paragraph to speak to each of the foundational criteria that you all use to rank the actions. So impact, cost effectiveness, technical feasibility is really just a yes or no, equity, and speak to that within the actual body of the climate action plan so that you really have a detailed section on actions for implementers to take and actually use to implement those particular actions. You'll also have that for any medium or low priority actions that you all as a subcommittee come to consensus on including in the body of the climate action plan. And then anything else that's medium or low that you decide not to include in the body of the climate action plan will be in an appendix to the plan in the spreadsheet that you all are using now, cleaned up a little bit. So it will still be there for reference, but in an appendix to the climate action plan.
And Marion, just a question about, so did you say paragraph per action or strategy?
They're both. So you'll have your overall pathway and a paragraph or so about the pathway and why that's important for your overall, adaptation and resilience and sequestration efforts and mitigation efforts. You'll be able to expand on the strategy as well in a paragraph or so. And then you'll have a built out table for each action, which has your action and then what you've discussed for those foundational criteria for each action. So it's both, to answer Justin's question.
So I think, to be clear, where we have, where we just can't really agree on a high to medium to low ranking, they'll still be in the matrix if we don't elevate it. If people feel that something is really, really important to be elevated and other people don't, then we're gonna have to kind of sort that out. But I think, hopefully the thing is everything will stay in the matrix unless you decide to pull something out before we're done. And then again, what we really want to focus on is where we have, I think, broad agreement, for high priorities, because those will go into the body of the document, again, to hopefully have real impact. Okay, any questions about that? Then I'm gonna go to Lauren's point about just talk about process for a minute and filling this thing out. Okay, Lauren, over to you.
Oh, I'm not sure that I'm okay. If we're just taking the space to talk a little bit about how the prioritization tools seem to work or not for us. Is that kind of, okay. Well, I'm just gonna open the email that I sent to Billy and Abby and just, well, one, Pat, when you share your screen, eventually when we start going through it, that first tab that you have that shows the various possible outcomes, everyone will see that it's only possible to get a medium ranking 3 different ways. It's possible to get a low ranking 13 ways, and I think a high ranking like 6. And that just seems really troubling. So one thing that I noticed pretty quickly was when you put medium across the board, medium cost, medium impact, medium co-benefit, and yes, technically feasible, it drops to a low, which if everything is medium, I feel like that's a pretty easy indicator of it just being medium. So that seemed like a little bit of a flaw. I noticed that a couple of the actions that would be relatively what I called low-hanging fruit, they would have a lower impact, but they wouldn't cost much and they could be implemented pretty quickly. Those dropped to low too. So a couple of the easy actions that state agencies, organizations, or individuals could take would just probably not make it into the plan, because I think as it's been presented to us, low actions and some medium actions will just be kept off for future plan iterations, but those will never rank high since they're, again, the low-hanging fruit. I found that was the case also for some of the foundational actions that need to be done, a lot of the planning, technical assistance, a lot of those type of actions that seem to fall into medium or low overall, despite the fact that that's actually needed in order to achieve some of the higher ticket, high outcome actions. And then the issue over the concern of doing equity last and only doing it for our high actions means that some things that might rank really highly for equity otherwise are considered low, and therefore we're kind of undervaluing the opportunity to do equitable actions. So those are my 4 or 5 big comments about it, and I wonder how others felt, if they felt similarly or not.
Other comment, just building on kind of the limitations of this tool, just so we're all upfront about that as we dive in. Any other quick thoughts?
I guess I just have a question. You know, I agree with Lauren that the kind of way that the scores are calculated seems a little off, where like things that otherwise seem reasonably well ranked come out as low. But didn't the steering committee develop that rubric? That's not unique to our subcommittee, right?
Correct.
No, it's not, but I don't think we ever saw the table that Pat just showed, or the algorithm for how cost effectiveness was captured between impact and, but maybe I'm wrong. Sometimes there's a difference between thinking about something and talking about it in theory, and then when you actually put it to use and seeing the outcomes there. I don't think, as a steering committee, I'll just speak for myself, that I would have said like, yes, let's do something where it's almost impossible to get a medium action and you're most likely to come out with a low. That just seems flawed to me.
So the steering committee did see it. It's included in, it's the end of the guidance document that has the CAP definitions that the steering committee and then the council approved, and subcommittees did have the opportunity to provide comment on those as well. So it was always included in that impact definitions, or excuse me, guiding principle definitions document. But I hear you on it's hard to know until you actually put it into practice. And I think that's something Jane and I are realizing too, is that in developing those rankings and then having them approved by the steering committee and the council, no one had gone through that screen yet. So didn't have a lot of capacity to really understand how that would impact actions. I think to Alyssa's question, subcommittees are deep into using this, as you all are. Cross-sector has used this and has actually moved into their equity screening at this point. So it is a little late to revise it. I do think, again, want to highlight that you all have the opportunity, and it's within your purview as a subcommittee just to decide if there are certain medium or low priority actions that you will want to elevate and include in the body of the CAP. And there's no limit on that number. So if there are certain ones that you think aren't accurately represented in the rankings that you still want to expand upon and include in the climate action plan as a whole, you all can do that. And I will say that in the climate action plan, we're not going to then list this was a high, this was a medium, this was a low. If you're choosing to elevate it, it will all be included in that table, and it's going to be grouped by implementer, not by overall ranking. So at that point, it will be the group of actions that you all as a subcommittee ranked or agreed upon to include in the climate action plan to recommend for implementation. It's not going to be grouped by the rankings that you all are doing right now. So I hear you, and that it's certainly flawed, and I think we're seeing that in that process that is coming through. But you know, I think it would be up to the steering committee or council if you wanted to change that. But I think we're on such a tight timeline, and subcommittees are using it already at this point, that it would be a little tough to change.
So here's one thought on this, to Lauren's point, and how we actually use this. And I want to, if I'm stepping out of school here, Marion, let me know. I think, again, where you got a really, really high rankings across the board, that's useful information for us to think about priorities. Where you have some like big differences, like a strong but one negative, like one's at a lot of high, one low, that's something to talk about. But there's some things in there that I didn't color code that still maybe need to be elevated. I want to emphasize that because they're important to you, Lauren, because they meet some of the criteria you noted. Their ranking was either all over the place or ended up being low, but still could have real value. So my view is that now the judgment of the subcommittee to work through that and decide what you want to elevate, what you want to leave in the matrix. And it's not ultimately going to be dependent on, you know, a kind of a numerical system. It's going to be on best professional judgment, which you all have, and your deep experience, lived experience, professional experience, et cetera. So I hope that's right, Marion. Abby.
Based on all of that, I think this all ties into the equity screening and a quick conversation that Kaya and I had yesterday, and just the utter need for transparency around all of this. I think that it's been a commonly accepted or understood fact that, you know, we're building the plane as we're flying it or crashing it, however you choose to think about that. And, you know, oh my gosh, that is distracting. I just totally lost my train of thought. This is all happening on public record. I love this. That this is a tool, like Pat said, and that I think we just need to try to capture in however we're framing out what we're doing, where we ran into, you know, where we ran into the issues, where we see that, you know, that the timeline was a problem, and just to try to call that out, to paint a picture of what it was like to try to go through this process on this timeline, and the ways in which, particularly, in my opinion, equity has suffered for that, and where we weren't able to capture the nuance we needed to, or where we weren't able to move forward appropriately because of these tensions between the deadline and trying to create the tools and all of this other thing. The other thing I was going to suggest is, I don't believe that we had a chance to do this, Pat, but I do wonder if it would be of benefit to talk about something else for a short period of time and have somebody assemble what the actions or strategies are that are all high, so that we can see them in one place to see what came out as high and understand like what that reflects back to us, and then dive into the medium lows. That's just a thought, totally open to other suggestions.
And Abby, the only because of time, we can talk about that. I think I did try to wear it. All came across high. Those are highlighted in green. So those should be visible by tab. I don't know if that's what you meant exactly or not.
Yeah, it's just for this purpose, it's hard to see. There's nowhere where all the greens are in like a list to say, these are the things that came out of this that are high, which I think would tell us where we're at. Like,
yeah,
these are the things that we all ranked high. Does this, you know, for example, capture a suite of forward momentum that captures sort of the will or the general sense of the group, or does it not?
Yep, exactly. So let's maybe just talk about process now. Again, tool to think with all of its imperfections, as I think well noted by many folks. So the ones where there was the most kind of comment and probably some back and forth that needs to happen, and I don't know how to best do this. So one option is under mitigation, adaptation, and land use. We can go into breakout groups in this meeting and kind of go through each of those tabs, and you guys can, you know, we can do the breakouts. You can essentially choose the one you want to go to, and we can do some further refinement and discussion, including potentially elevating some stuff or the like. or we can try to work through this as a full group. It's just, the challenge is just that it's a bundle to, you know, to work through together as a whole. So I think we should, co-chairs, figure out kind of how we want to proceed now as we try to make sense of this, you know, in part to Abby's last point. So what do you all think? And then we can, you know, we can talk through this and then kind of figure out where we're going to go from between this week and next.
I don't know, Abby, I kind of defer to you on this. Do you have a preference as to whether we do this collectively or in breakouts?
Abby might be on the phone with Judy.
Oh.
Why don't we do this? Kaya, thank you for joining us. We actually have a side question while we wait for Abby. Kaya, I think wanted to check in with your role today. We know that next week is really you really focusing on the equity screening for the things this group asked you to engage with. Today, were you going to do, what was your thought about what role you wanted to play today?
And I do apologize for not being able to join you earlier. I did have a previous commitment that kept me from being able to come in at the start. So my goal today was to talk with you all a little bit about both a review and a refresher as to why the equity work is important. And to try to situate us in the work that we're going to do ahead. I can tell you that it's a very easy shortcut, and it's very common within bureaucratic systems to say that it's the equity work that is the problem and the source of tension and challenges, rather than recognizing that the system that you're functioning underneath is completely dysfunctional. So I'm going to be trying to talk you all through that a little bit, and in the sessions next week and in the days following, we'll be really pressing you all to think about this, and as Abby was stating, to try to get folks comfortable with being really transparent about what can and can't be done. I think the pressures of feeling like you have to get the equity screen done in time for the report are not realistic at all. Neither is the report being done by December 1st realistic. But definitely the equity work does take more time, and it will take more time, and there should be an expectation that the time will be given for it. So I think that's something you can speak very clearly of. But I can absolutely say, as somebody who is being publicly targeted for trying to help you all through this work, I'm not going to back down, and the inconvenience of the extra work that has to happen in it is not an inconvenience that are actually, it's the work that has to be done. It's not a secondary piece, but it is something that it's what you have to do this right, just plain and simple. And this is what the public is going to expect from you all. So this is, we're going to just need to really reframe and set our expectations a little bit differently on all of this, including the final cap in and of itself, as to what can actually be delivered, because you all have been given an impossible task, and the work will be unfinished. That's just facts. So we're going to go through today, and I'll go through that presentation of talking about that and kind of how this approach towards looking at this work will go. I'm happy to answer any questions after doing this first round with cross-sector mitigation, and we'll be continuing to refine the process in time for your meeting next week and go through kind of what's going to be needed to help you feel confident stepping into the space of this work and starting to imagine this work for next Friday. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, that's great. And how much time would you like to kind of have that conversation today?
I don't need very much. I think it's about a 15-minute PowerPoint, but we can create more buffer if people want to ask specific questions or raise any concerns that they might have.
What if we allow at least 30, just so we can have some discussion? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, I'm available.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, Abby, where's Abby? I think you went on to help Judy connect. The question is, do we want to kind of begin to sort through a few of these tabs in breakouts, which we can do, or we want to try to do it as a full group? And if we did do breakouts, which is an if, mitigation, adaptation, and land use are the ones with probably the most commentary and stuff we could do in smaller groups to try to refine a bit. I think the other ones tend to be shorter, and I think we can go through those collectively. But it's really up to you and Billy and the group how you want to proceed.
Oh, Charlie, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off, Abby. I just wanted to say that I think that you just pointed out my concern here, Pat, is that there's a few tabs that I think a lot of us have commentary or concerns on. And so if we do breakout groups, I would just be concerned that it wouldn't be effective to be able to have that commentary on the things that are happening where we want to be. So I haven't learned to clone myself yet. I'm working on it, but that might not be effective. Thanks.
I would tend to agree with that. Again, I know it takes a long time to have everybody in the same room, but I'm afraid of what we miss when we don't. So I guess that's my kind of working thought at the moment.
Okay.
Happy to hear other people's thoughts.
And maybe it's best today to have the full group discussion, and then there may be some subgroup or task lead work to kind of refine and further things after today for next week. So maybe it's best to just kind of go through as much as we can today collectively.
Are folks on board with that approach for the moment? Work through what we can. General nodding-ish blank stares. Fantastic. Okay. We'll move forward as such.
All right. So here's a thought.
I'm rubbing off on you, Abby.
I'll be a bureaucrat by the time we're done with this. I'm kidding. I love to you all, but not for me.
Marion, are you willing to project the spreadsheet that you posted online? Are you able to do that by tab?
Yes. Are you going to ask me to edit it?
I don't think so. I think we'll let's look through it, and I will need to kind of make sure we're keeping some notes. I'll try to keep some notes maybe on my separate internal spreadsheet here. And here's my thought. Let's, I think we start with mitigation. And what I'm going to assume is if the rankings were all high and essentially they're colored green, I hope we can just kind of let them sit and they look pretty good. If they're yellow, they're mediums and or highs. And so we can decide how we want to talk about them, what to do with them. And then the orange are things that, again, there was like high, but somebody said low. So we've got to talk about them because it's hard to know how to parse that. And then lastly, there are things, to Lauren's point, there may be things in here that you want to elevate that just don't have a color because their rankings were all over the place or they were low, but they're still valuable. So we've got to try to cover those things too. So it's a little bit, we'll have to see, well, let's try this out and see how we can be as effective as we can be.
Patrick, is everyone in here or just ones that people answered to?
So here's mitigation. So what happens is, what you'll see there is anybody who sent me a spreadsheet with a ranking per an action is in there. Some of the actions or some of the tabs had like 7 or 8 people comment. Some of them only had 1 or 2. So
yeah, but that's not what I'm asking.
okay, sorry.
I'm asking if all the strategies and actions are in there.
Yes, they should all be in here from the last version of the spreadsheet, was that last week or whatever. So they should all be in here, including some cleanup that's not quite done in terms of redundancy, those kinds of things.
Thank you.
So this should be all inclusive. And if anybody sees something that somehow got dropped, then please raise that as we talk to. Okay. So one other question for the co-chairs, I guess, is do we believe for elevating, to the report do we need at least 1 action per every strategy? This is just a practical question of writing. Or can we just have strategies that don't have actions?
If it's a strategy without actions, I would argue that strategy should be an action under a different strategy.
Okay.
The strategy should have actions to help get that strategy to reality. And if there's nothing under it, that doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Marion, do you want to go to the top? Because I think go to the top of the spreadsheet. There we go. Okay. There we go. There we go. That's now I'm kind of seeing what we're seeing. So maybe let's look at the strategy and the actions under each and have some discussion. So you can see here there were a number of things that people ranked across the board who ranked them high. There's a few things where we had medium highs, and there was some stuff that was kind of all over the place that just I didn't color, doesn't mean it's not important. So maybe people look at this a little bit, and let's particularly talk about the yellows or anything that's not colored that maybe feel is still important to include. And we'll give people a minute to look at this if they can. And remember, this is the strategy to leverage, expand, and adapt existing state Vermont programs that support ag sector's mitigation of climate change. And Marion, maybe you can scroll down just a touch just so we can see all the actions under this strategy and say, okay, good. And there we can. Okay, good. Go up, go back one up. There we go. Thank you. Sorry. And and again, the orange one is where we've got high, but one low. So, and it may be partly because of the way it's a duplicate. But in case. So look at this. Let us know what you think, particularly about yellows and or things that don't have colors. Abby.
I guess I don't. This was a hard one for me because with a lot of the mitigation pieces, the mitigation pieces have so many co-benefits that I find it hard to see. They just, you know, whether it's edge of field practices or pollinator habitat or diversity, or it was hard for me to see that this suite of things wouldn't all be high in terms of how you would structure moving forward with more programming in this regard. So I think maybe that's where I was coming from when I was thinking about these things. But that's where this gets tricky because, you know, nutrient management, for example, I think in my head is super important for climate, but is also super important for water quality and also a component of RAPs already, and already an existing program where we can easily build out more funding. And so I was sort of filtering through things like that in a way as I was going through this. And so that was why I personally ranked it high, because it seemed like something that there was already a really good existing structure around, and it was just that it needed to be capacitated more. And it's also, as I understand it, at least a pretty effective mitigation strategy. Same with, you know, the coordination with NRCS cost sharing around silvopasture, alley cropping, forest farming. That's gonna be really, really important given how much forest land farmers already manage, and needing to build out their resourcing for their ability to further capacitate their forest land in this regard, and capture as much mitigation benefit from interplanting in grasslands where they can, for example, or crop fields where they can. Those are just the thoughts I have off the top of my head.
And by the way, because this spreadsheet is so thick, I am going to probably not look at chat today because I just can't track all of it. So if people could keep chat to a minimum, just because it's just hard to give the detail here to track, just to let you all know. Sorry about that.
Hey, Pat, after we hear from Ryan and Iris, can I suggest a process move?
Yes, absolutely. Ryan.
Would like to hear Billy's process comment, but I will share, you know, for an example, looking at some of the practices that are outlined here from, you know, other literature, they're, you know, found to be, you know, can have a significant impact, and they can have a significant impact at less than $100 a ton. You know, below the social cost of carbon. And so, you know, nutrient management is also one of those practices. When implemented, it can have an immediate effect because you're not purchasing as much fertilizer, as an example, because you're balancing it through crop rotation or other strategies in the development of a nutrient management plan. So, you know, to me, that is you know, and as Abby mentioned, that's one specific one that's already required. So I think investment in that is, you know, certainly, you know, a very high value, low hanging fruit. When we look at, as an example, the edge of field practices, CREP, you know, it's true that it is more costly on a per ton basis than some of the agronomic conservation practices. But the fact that the program exists and there's so many co-benefits for resilience and adaptation in some of those floodplain areas where that those practices could be implemented, it comes out as a, you know, very important program to elevate as something to be expanded in the state. And there is, still, some good mitigation opportunity that exists with that practice. And the agroforestry and silvicultural practices that exist out there. One study, almost all of the benefit from that is available at less than $100 per ton of CO2 equivalent when implemented. So it's a very cost-effective thing. It's something, and we have support from that through NRCS and their expansion of the conservation practices available under agroforestry. So it would seem to line up well with many of the conversations we heard, not just in the full subcommittee, but also in the 5C subtask group as specific comments to how supporting that programming on the state side is important as well. So and as far as process, my ranking for these, this was a category where I thought there was sufficient evidence from a number of different studies about the cost and cost effectiveness of these practices. Obviously, it's more of a global or national review, so it's certainly not Vermont specific, but it lends good evidence to the fact that these technologies exist, they have a high impact, and they can be cost effective for almost everyone in this category from my review. So just want to share those comments. Thank you.
Before I go to Iris, Marion, I'm sorry, there's actually a mistake. I got a last commentary last night at 11. I incorporated all that this morning, resent out a spreadsheet this morning with actually 6 commenters, not 5 in this section. So this is, I think, unfortunately built off of the spreadsheet last night, not the one I sent out this morning.
Okay, I can, if you give me a moment, I can upload the new one. I think this is, let me check my email while you guys.
I also can pull up my screen and I can deal with that too.
And maybe this is where I can jump in.
Go for it.
I would like to make a suggestion that we hear from Iris and Judy, and then we pause this work. And if Kai is available, we move to her, and someone in the background takes out the high and medium scored, the things that you've color coded for each tab. They put them in one place, and we all look at those together. And the conversation is focused on, are there things that are included that should be dropped, or are there things that are missing that should be added? And just target the conversation that way, because I think going line by line through these spreadsheets is going to be a difficult process to manage given the time that we have. I'm not wedded to that, but that's just a suggestion.
So let me go to Iris and Judy, and then Billy, we'll come back to that process piece. Iris.
Yeah, my piece was also sort of on process. I was wondering if we have the ability to prioritize strategies as well as actions, because this strategy seems like it's a really high priority one because it has a high impact and lots of co-benefits. And the suite of actions, though some of them might not score high enough to be considered, I think that it might be beneficial in some cases like this to discuss whether we could take the whole suite of actions for that strategy to prioritize. I'm not sure if that makes a whole ton of sense, but I think that there are some cases where the smaller actions add up and it's important. So I think that sort of goes against that. So feel free to discard it, but that's my thought.
No, and one, Iris, to that good point, the way I understood the ranking was that some people did rank strategy, some people didn't. So I just took those out because it wasn't I think the approach was to rank actions. But I think you're a fair point about whether we also want to think about prioritizing strategies. Judy, over to you.
Yeah, I just have a question about the comments that some of these are rated low. The ones that seem to be rated low all seem to be connected with traditional ecological knowledge. Something that is, as you know, a learned process, but it's also a proven process. So for instance, 11, it is a known process that if we do not have a healthy wild garden, we will not have a healthy cultivated garden. And I just want to make sure that traditional ecological knowledge is included here.
And Judy, I think that's a really important one where, again, wherever it falls in the rankings may be really important to elevate and just do. And I think that is a really good example of one that the ranking system glosses over in not a good way. Okay, so Alyssa, do you want to just describe what maybe you just did do? Because I know you just sent around something, so maybe just as back to process.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was really valuable input from Judy. So thanks. I hope you keep doing that. I just looked through all the tabs and pulled the actions that had green across the board and put them into a file so that I could see them together, as kind of Abby had suggested at the beginning. And then I thought maybe I should just share it with you. So I sent that. It's not a very exciting document, but it just has all the things that are green in there. And I thought if we've got that, we can say we don't have to discuss those much further. They've got broad consensus for being high priority.
Where did you send that, Alyssa?
I just replied to an email that was sent to the whole subcommittee, assuming that everybody would be on that. But if you didn't get it, we can forward it to a different email address if you prefer. It was, I think, the email that had this spreadsheet attached to it for our homework.
And
It looked like it went to your basket AOL
Yep,
account.
I got it. Thank you.
okay, so Billy, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, so in doing that, I noticed that there were a few tabs that did not have any green. And so it may not be the best way to identify the pieces that, should be elevated. We should likely have actions or strategies from each of the tabs.
Right. So, and I think, for instance, in economic viability in particular, I don't remember which those two tabs were. There were some lower rankings, but I think it's because maybe the impact isn't as clear, but the importance still could be high. Marion, we're gonna.
Sorry, I just uploaded the version you sent this morning, so I'm switching screens.
Okay, thank you.
Give me 1 second.
Judy, you all set, or do you have another comment?
I can't figure out how to put the hand down.
Oh,
Got it.
Not the
There we
only.
go.
Okay, so to the point just made here, do we want to, again, we could use Alyssa's sheet she just did. If you want to go to Kaya and have some conversation, I can take some time with the most recent spreadsheet and try to kind of do it just a slightly different version of what Alyssa did. Billy and Abby, give some direction here.
I personally think that would be helpful. So I don't know, Abby, if you got thoughts.
I don't.
Why don't maybe I can, if I hate to miss Kaya's speech because I feel like I need to hear that too, but what I can do is maybe we can give this to Kaya for a bit and I can try to play with Alyssa's piece and the spreadsheet of it and try to make it a little more cleaner to talk to.
Right, and I think, for each tab, it's kind of the high ranking things. So we frankly don't need to talk about those. And then, the other things that have identified and the things that haven't. So we could just have them all organized and say what needs to go where.
Good. Okay. So if that's the case, then let me go to town and I'll turn this back to you and Abby and Kai, and I'm going to go on mute for a bit and do a little bit of work here.
Thanks. All right. This is an active agenda here today. We're moving all over the place. So Pat, thank you for doing that work. Unless I see lots of thumbs down or angry faces from folks, I'd suggest we move on to Kaya right now, and Kaya, take the time that you would like to kind of frame up the work that you're going to be doing with us now and into the future, and then we'll have some opportunity for questions. Then we can break for public comment, and then we'll go back to the prioritization work.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So, hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Here we are. So, I'm glad to be able to share this time with you today and give you some updates with regards to the work we have ahead. So, I'm very excited to be able to share this with you. This PowerPoint is going to be an opportunity. This conversation is going to be an opportunity to get ourselves grounded back into how we're approaching managing equity within these processes. As I kind of said and gave the little bit of a preamble to before earlier, one of the things that I want to kind of give back as far as some guidance is to really realize that this equity work is really difficult and it's deep and it is complex and actually takes more time than what we are granted right now. We still are at a point, just to be clear, where we have not yet received the feedback and really seen that collated in a way that you all can drive that input from the community engagement processes to be able to have them here. What I can share with you around that is that while the group has been, Rise and Climate Action have been working really hard on those community engagement opportunities, and as well as the many different community partners that have been trying to hold sessions, that there are definitely sectors and there are populations that have still been missed within this process. And I can say that as far as with regards to engagement from BIPOC communities, that has been extremely limited and will not be representative in a way that I feel you can move with confidence to really make sure that the work that you're doing here is reflective of all of these different pieces that need to create equity. So we're going to need to give ourselves grace, and you're going to need to also be able to use your voice to say, again, we were not given directives through this process to be able to support really building in robust equity into the work that we're trying to do. So how we're going to try to do this within the actual I'm sorry, I won't be able to see the chat. So if you do have questions or things that are coming up, I can take a look once I'm done with the presentation, but to run the PowerPoint, I won't also be able to engage with the chat. So that in mind, we're going to be using our Zoom again, and we're going to be using, we have some community norms that are built around that. We're going to ask that people are going to limit their use of the chat during these times to better support an inclusive dialogue. There's going to be notes that will be taken on the fly, and people are going to need to be able to draw information, and it's difficult to do so if they're also trying to track the chat. And also for those that may be joining by phone or cannot see the visuals. We are going to try to be mindful as much as we can about jargon and acronyms. Again, this work is also preparing us to give this and present this work to the public. So it's time to start practicing now how to speak about this in terms that are both plain language but are easily understandable, and as well across people in your committee who may not be specifically focused on a particular strategy or area of expertise. We're going to keep track of our participation. We'll be using a strong model that involves you stating who you are, again, so that people will know who you are for the record, and recognizing the number of turns that we're taking and speaking in these spaces. And we're going to be managing our expectations as well to recognize that and it's impossible for us to get this work done in one session, in 2 sessions, sometimes even in 3, and that there is going to be work happening external to these meeting spaces in order to keep doing this work. I do want to also state that you all should go ahead and start situating yourselves and feeling like you're going to need to ask for help. So as I joked with class sector mitigation, you might have to put out a front porch forum of some sort to say, these are things we need to be able to answer these questions with as much accuracy as we can, and knowing that we have really taken a look at all the different pieces to ensure that no person, no community, no region, no living things have been left behind in this process. So just as a reminder as well, I provided this for the Climate Council, a little bit like what this work actually is, okay? This is an opportunity to review and to strengthen the recommendations you're going to put forth to better address equity in design and in implementation. And so again, while you may not be able to get into some of the specifics that you might like, in time for December 1st, you can set a very clear intention that those very same questions you could not answer will be answered before these turn into policies or rule changes that are going to have lasting effects. It's also important to note that this work is an important mirror to state what these recommendations will or will not do with specificity regarding the lived experiences of those in Vermont, right? This is a pathway towards transparency on decision-making processes. As Abby was saying, as we're going to keep saying, say what we're doing, say what we're not doing, say what we know and what we don't know. This is that opportunity to be very clear as the public and Vermont needs those answers, right? This is an encouragement for deeper collaboration between state government and the private sector, okay? You all can't do it all. Neither can the state of Vermont. It's going to take many, many different hands to try to make this work actually become a more complete body of work. We're going to see this also as a means for listening and reflecting the public hopes, dreams, and demands regarding our climate crisis in and of itself. This is that opportunity. So what this work is not, it is not a partisan initiative. Okay. This is also not a panacea that's going to solve all the things. This work is not complete, nor should it be, really at any point in time. It is not siloed. The work that you're going to do will affect other subcommittees. The work that you have affects multiple ecosystems, and this work in and of itself will have impacts on generations to come. It is all in a tandem together. This work is also not perfect, not even close. So the way that we're going to be utilizing the guiding principles and the scoring rubric. So these are just some high-level reminders, but as we go into what are we going to be doing for the next week as far as getting prepared for this. So we're going to use the guiding principles to help set the framework to better ensure that the recommendations are not just comprehensive in the scope that they do, but they're actually inclusive as well. Now, these are some of the key questions that the public's going to want answered to support your recommendations. Both those that are in support of this and those that might critique it and have valid critiques or questions, you want to the best of your ability, press to ensure that those questions will be answered. We are also going to be trying to utilize the questions to identify needed information. You will find that some of the questions that we're asking within this, we don't have the answers to yet, but we probably want them. So this is that chance to start to flag what we don't know so that we can begin a strategy towards gaining that knowledge. And then it's also an opportunity to set your intentions for the state and the legislature in further development and implementation of equity through your very recommendations. So as we're going to do this work within the space next week, we're going to more than likely have an opportunity where we will go through a strategy or an action together as a group using the scoring rubric and the guiding questions to get us through understanding how they work together. Then we'll likely break into some smaller subgroups or some breakout groups to get into practicing this with a few other actions or strategies. When we're in that space, I'll be looking for your task leads in the breakout room space to help facilitate those conversations. Okay, so as you will be the ones that know those proposals the best, it will give an opportunity to give the very quickest and briefest of summaries to get everyone in the space oriented to that work, and then to be able to start going through the questions. I will be bopping back and forth between the different groups to try to answer any questions, help guide conversations as need be, but recognizing again that a lot of this work is going to happen outside of this meeting space. I want also our task leads to feel comfortable about initiating those conversations. So we will be supporting that, and we will have note takers in those spaces as well to help facilitate capturing what's said within those spaces. So now that we've done a little bit of like, this is what it's going to feel like, it's just a reminder of what it is that we're doing. Okay, so these come directly from the document that came out of the Just Transition Subcommittee to set, of course, those principles. And as a reminder, as we're thinking about equity, it is not one single thing, it is many things. So if we are to consider distributive equity, for example, distributive equity starts by recognizing disparities that come in the allocations of resources. It comes in health outcomes. We see it in inequities in living conditions and lack of political power that place frontline or impacted communities at greater risk. And so the distributive equity strategies are intended to target resources to shore up those disparities, especially around the areas of adaptation and mitigation that we're dealing with here in this space. So the goal is to be able to think through how we can better distribute both the resources and the benefits in these spaces to bring about a greater equity for those who've had heavier impacts. And we're looking at procedural equity, right? So procedural equity is often referred to as equitable planning and implementation. So that equitable planning and implementation requires that communities have a meaningful opportunity to participate. So again, we want to make sure that what we're bringing forth is somehow informed by the people of Vermont. Okay, so we are trying to take this information and utilize it in a comprehensive way. And so it's recognizing that policymakers are going to have to collaborate with our communities themselves to learn about these perspectives so that the solutions will meet those needs. And that equitable planning focuses on both the local level, and it ensures that local communities who will also be directly impacted have the opportunity to provide input on the policies that directly affect them. So it is not a top-down approach, but it is a lateral collaborative approach. Contextual equity ensures that mitigation and adaptation strategies, they're going to take into account how different groups like low-income communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities, and people of color, individuals with disabilities or elderly, those that are living in rural areas, and others who are most vulnerable to climate change, right? The contextual equity ensures that the development of these strategies are going to happen at statewide and local levels. They're going to think about the disparities of how this will look in implementation. And then the corrective equity piece, which is also important, ensures that the mitigation and the adaptation strategies provide communities with clear processes to hold the state accountable to its commitments to pursue equity. And we don't have that baked into the GWSA, but that is something that as a group you are welcome to challenge and inquire about how that equity will be maintained following your great work. So as a reminder again about our impacted and frontline communities. So again, as global warming is going to continue to accelerate the council and the subcommittees, you're going to have to engage with those that are on the front lines. And so as a reminder of how we're approaching this work, we know that, for example, that studies continue to show that low-income community, Indigenous peoples, Black and other communities of color are always, globally, those who are particularly vulnerable to climate change. And in addition, as industry and jobs are going to have to transition away from greenhouse gas emissions and towards green jobs and livelihoods, there's going to be a need to remember to focus on the labor sector. Okay. And finally, some Vermonters are going to also necessarily be focused, especially in this time of a pandemic, on achieving immediate goals of food, shelter, safety, and health, which can impact their ability to participate in this work and to focus on long-term adaptation to climate and economic changes, as there are immediate needs that are in front of them that are absolutely worsened by the climate crisis in and of itself, but are right in front of them. So that good citizenship we're looking for and the all hands on deck will have its challenges and its pushes and pulls as we continue to go through these challenging times. So we're going to use the guiding questions in the rubric in a few different ways. We're going to try to use and let the questions guide our thinking around the total impacts and the potential, okay, that's possible within this as a critical function of building your recommendations out. And so we're going to then use the rubric to help refine and identify areas of strengths and challenges. So the questions are going to help us answer the details, and the rubric's going to help us do a gut check and track our progress. So the rubric, as a reminder, it allows a score of 1 to low or 3 to high for each of the criteria. So saying that something might receive a 1 is that it meets the criteria to a degree, but it's going to really provide a limited explanation, or there's significant opportunities even to enhance the criterion's proposal. Perhaps we don't know what we don't know, and nor do we know that that information might be somewhere that we can utilize here. So we're going to have to reach out to get that. We're going to look at moderate. So it also the proposal meets the criteria, but there's also opportunities to enhance it to better meet the goals of the guiding principles. And 3 hits it out of the park. It excels in meeting the criteria, no problem whatsoever. So when we finish our assessment work, which again is not going to be complete, you will not be able to get it all done, but if you're able to get on that homework and get moving as we get started in our breakout groups, you can see some decent progress, enough to start to feel what that's going to feel like in practice. But you're going to also want to start to think about what are you going to need around research support. Do you need additional and maybe even really specific subject matter expertise in ways you didn't anticipate? Do you need sample legislation? Are you going to need support from data and science to help with data analysis, or helping you find specific indicators for your tracking and your measurement of accountability, and even initial assessment on where your areas of needs are? So that's what we're going to go through. We're going to be doing that next Friday, this whole journey. So again, as I said, we did our first round and we're going to have some adjustments that we will make to it. But ultimately, if we can keep folks somewhat on task as far as trying to get into the work, you can make some really decent progress and start to step into the work. If we kind of stay still in discussion mode and less in thinking about the things that we'll need to do to answer the questions, it can be a harder lift down the road to get the work done. So, thank you. No, I did want to note, Billy had put something in the chat. He did mention it briefly that we were going to do public comment after this portion. So I'm just saying that again on cam for the those participating to know that that will happen. One last piece speaking around that as well. So when we go into the breakout groups, again, members of the public will be able to choose which breakout groups they will want to go into to hear about the topics there. We are keeping this as a committee conversation, but there will be, we will bake into the agenda at least 2 places for public comment where they can absolutely respond within that space and ensure that their voices are heard. So that's my whole presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Kaya. That was really helpful. It looks like Judy has a question.
Will we come back together afterwards to discuss what each group discussed?
You're muted, Kaya.
Started to think there won't be enough time, more than likely, to have us come back and do a report back out. Each of those breakout groups will be recorded, just so that you'll know. So they will live and they will exist, and we will have detailed notes. What we'll do when we do return and convene after the breakout groups is an opportunity to talk about what it is that people still need in order to continue to do this work. So because it will need to continue to be fleshed out. It's like you won't get it done within that time frame.
Okay, Lauren or Abby?
Thanks for that presentation, Kaya. I guess I have a question about the role of breakout rooms today versus next week. I won't even try to articulate what I think the difference might be, but I'm wondering if maybe Pat or Kaya or Marian or Jane can kind of explain the difference between what we're doing today in these breakout rooms versus what we're doing next week with the equity screen.
I don't think we're going to do breakouts today. I think there was a suggestion by Pat that we might want to break the paths up, but others felt we need to have that conversation together. So
okay, I was conflating those 2 different breakout rooms then. Thank you.
No worries. And just to reiterate again, so the purpose of the breakout rooms next week will be to using the equity tool and the equity assessment. It won't be on the prioritization. So just to clarify that.
Abby and then Jane.
So I know we're doing all of this backwards. I know we can't finish any of it. I know we're missing everything we need to do it all, but I know we still have to come up with a climate action plan, and I have been thinking about this all night, Kaya, and I still don't quite understand, aside from literally just writing a sentence into everything that we put in our section of the climate action plan, which is fine, but I think I need to understand that part, like where the rubber meets the road with the climate action plan, which we have not been given an, we have to do that, is my understanding, barring a mass resignation. So literally, like, as a person who in theory is supposed to draft things, where does that leave us? That's where I'm struggling to put the pieces together.
So it's my understanding within the format of the way the climate action plan will be literally drafted and formatted that there isn't necessarily a space for even this good work This I'm really emphasizing again for those who are wanting to advocate for particular actions or wanting to see further development on those actions, that it's going to be necessary to be prepared to start thinking through this work, recognizing it will not be complete. I think the Just Transition Subcommittee is trying to figure out, again, because they have a whole section within the CAP where they get to talk about a number of different aspects of the process and how to build out this equity. So there, perhaps it goes in that section of there, but it will be something that's going to need to live, and it will need to be something that continues out. So I don't know that it's not appropriate to give almost a status report in recognizing we realize we need a bunch of data on these things, or we need way more feedback from a particular sector to really make sure that we've got this right. I don't know that there's anything wrong with stating that very clearly. You got to get the CAP done, and you will get it done. You should be able to frame and advocate for yourself as folks that are doing this work on behalf of the state about both the feasibility and the necessity for its continuance in some really different ways. So that's just my advice within this. Jane's the one who can guide you probably the best around what all that will look like. But as a part of equity, as a part of all of the different components of equity, these are things that need to be stated somewhere. They need to be highlighted somewhere.
Let's hear from Jane, and then maybe move on since we're going to spend the bulk of next week on this topic, if that's okay with folks.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to first respond to Judy, but then since the conversation with Abby, I also want to respond to that. So first, I just want to say that we don't think that there was going to be time in the schedule next week to come back from the breakouts and have substantive conversations about what happened in the breakouts. But I did want to say that in our conversation with Kaya about how this would flow, the following week would be a more substantive discussion as a group around the scoring rubrics application on the specific actions, reflections, and questions at a higher level, so that I think there would be space the following week to come back to any conversation that you had in the breakout that was something that you wanted to lift up to the full subcommittee. So I hope I have that right. Yeah. And then just thinking about the role of how we speak to this in the climate action plan, in the CAP drafting process, there's a component about how you'll speak to equity for each specific action that's pretty short, as is all of the components for the foundational criteria. But I imagine that the scoring rubrics worksheets that you'll be filling out will be included in the appendix in the CAP. And I did want to lift up and highlight the conversation about this section on implementation around equity work. We had a really nice conversation with the co-chairs of Just Transitions last night and planning for the Just Transitions subcommittee meeting next week around like a stepwise approach in how that meeting will flow, around Kaya joining that meeting to speak to what lessons learned and reflections of what the work is happening at the subcommittee level, where we're falling short, what we still need to do. And then use that as a springboard to transition to how we're going to frame up the intentional future work that we still know that we need to do for application of the guiding principles and scoring rubric, in how we shift from policy level conversations into program design, which I think was something that really came out to me yesterday in the conversation with cross-sector. It was clear that the scoring rubric worked really well as a conversation to highlight considerations for how we take these high level ideas and move into more strategic design of implementation. But it was also clear that that is not going to happen for the climate action plan. And so thinking about what the next steps are in that space, I just encourage any of you to join in the conversation, to like bear witness to the Just Transitions conversation and feed into any comments and concerns that you all have in this space about what we aren't able to really do well right now, given the time and work that we're moving towards December 1st on. So thanks, that was it.
Thanks, Jane. So I would suggest that we move on and go back to our public comment space. Sorry, I skipped over that accidentally. and then we can resume our prioritization work. So folks can raise their hands if they want to comment. I see Annette's got her hand up. Anyone else? Cheryl? Jennifer? Okay, why don't we go in that order? Annette, Cheryl, Jennifer, take a couple minutes, please.
Thank you. This is Annette Smith with Vermont for a Clean Environment. My comments are not on the prioritization, but on the specifics that I see this spreadsheet seems to be changing a bit. So on the energy and materials tab C, doesn't that always happen? Under strategy, I like the stuff that's in red about the sustainable and ethically sourced renewable energy materials and things. But as I have observed before, you're talking about solar, but you don't mention wind. And for instance, reduce or eliminate purchase of solar panels, battery, lithium, and other rare earth mineral materials used in the making of solar panels and car batteries. Wind turbines contain a huge amount of rare earth materials. I think the ones up on Lowell, there's like 500 to 1,000 pounds of rare earth minerals in each one of them. So I recommend that you update this entire section so that it references solar and wind. I don't know if you deal with SF6 at all, but those wind turbines also contain a lot of SF6, which is, I don't know, 20-some thousand more times potent greenhouse gas than CO2. And Sylvia Knight did a report probably in 2005 about SF6 and how much is leaking out of like Velco's transformers. So if that's not a topic you've looked at, I recommend you look at it. My other comment is under the land use tab. And I will say that I'm disappointed and perplexed that on number 6, you recommend exempting certain state designated centers from Act 250. Reducing regulation of development in downtowns and village centers. This has been a topic of discussion in legislative committees over the last couple of years. And as a result, I have learned that there are essentially 3 different things going on here. One is that we have downtowns that flood. And so I would expect to see this subcommittee having grappled with something that nobody else seems to have talked about. And it's been very challenging getting it into the legislative discussion, that you're talking about increasing development in downtowns, but how are you addressing the flooding issues? And I would expect that those would be in here. And just the idea that we're going to push development into downtowns ignores that we're also have flood prone areas. I've got maps that overlay the different flood areas and downtowns, and I'm sure that other people have that data available in a more complete way, but have you looked at it? The idea of exempting downtowns from Act 250, someone did a very thorough review of Act 250 and how often it actually comes into play in downtowns. It's not very often. And when it does, it's really important. And for instance, there's a big development in Burlington where wildlife corridors were protected because of Act 250. Water quality monitoring came about in Lake Champlain because of Act 250. And this is not the time to be making Act 250 into a boogeyman. We should be expanding the use of Act 250 because it is an extremely effective tool. I run into it all the time where I see local zoning doing whatever the developer wants, shutting out the public, and it doesn't matter which town it is.
Thanks,
That's what's
Annette.
happening. Okay, I'm almost done. I know you're short on time. I have not weighed in much with this committee, but I saw these things and I'm kind of upset to see that you're looking at continuing this mantra of reducing Act 250, and I will just stop there. I had a third point, but you want to move on. Bye.
Thanks. And just to your first point about not having wind along with solar, Judy had raised that in the past. We did go in and change a number of the actions in pathway F to add wind. It was an oversight that the ones in pathway C weren't changed as well. So we'll do that right now. So thank you for flagging that. Cheryl.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. I would like to just talk really briefly and quickly and let Annette have more of my time to vocalize her third point. I'm going to say it really fast, hopefully. There seems to be, in general, a lack of emphasis on old growth forest, which is incredibly important, as many of y'all here know. And also old trees themselves are very important, extremely important. There are numerous people researching and teaching forest ecology and forestry that also have been brought up here by numerous people in the past, and some that haven't been brought up, that advocate old forest for management, old growth forest, structurally, biologically. And I think that this document in all places needs more of that. And that can be, of course, combined with, all the waterway stuff, wetlands, riparian areas, etc. That's it really fast for that one. A detail and an example is like number 10 in mitigation, number 10 has increased riparian buffer will address, so increasing the riparian buffer will address the things that Abby was discussing, the various agricultural uses. And here's, like if you look at number 11, it says one of the strategy and action is practices including, practices enhancing wildlife habitat, pollinator, and biodiversity. For one thing, all that needs to say is wildlife, because pollinators and biodiversity is in wildlife habitat. So you really can reduce the words, but I guess that's education also in this document. But instead of the increase in number 10, strategy and action should say increase riparian forested buffer to on all perennial streams, emphasis, to 300 feet, or whatever the feet is that everybody decides upon. My suggestion is at least that. And then number 11 is then covering the action, and number 10 is covered under that one and also in others. It seems like the list of actual practices ought to be there. And detail, because people need detail. They can't just say do that. You can't just say, do this general thing, because it's probably not going to happen. You're going to get a 10-foot grassy strip, for example. Okay, and finally, what really does equity mean? I put that in the chat, but I guess we're not looking at that today. Different peoples and communities have been treated with inequality, and that needs to be addressed. Additionally, other species have been treated with inequality, so much so that some don't even exist anymore. And we continue to put that on the back burner. And we're sort of it's like not even on the front burner here, even though the name is ecosystems, all right. Thank you. And if there's any extra time, I'd love to hear Annette's third point.
We can go back to Annette after Jennifer and Zach speaks if she has a succinct third point. So after you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, everybody. I wanted to especially thank Kaya and to appreciate Abby's concern about how to do the equity piece justice. I think it's going to be hard, but I guess, as Kaya pointed out, this is a work in progress and will continue to be. And what I'm really liking the idea of is the fact that Just Transitions will have an overall statement in the climate action plan. And then to the extent that it makes sense without it feeling like it's just sticking a line in, to have equity within, and as Cheryl suggested, biodiversity as well as human groups within the strategies. and for all groups, not just the agriculture and ecosystem group. So I'm liking that notion to the extent that it's possible. And I understand that it really makes no sense to do it if it's just a line and not really going to be acted on. But I hope there's a way to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer and Zach.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Zach Porter, Conservation Law Foundation. Good to see you all. I will just apologize right up front because I missed the last 30 minutes of the meeting due to emergency that I had to deal with, the conflict that came up. But I wanted to weigh in. I think this will end up being before, from my understanding of where the conversation is with the group, before the conversation moves into a discussion of prioritization again. So there's just a few things that I wanted to flag for you as you go into this discussion. One is on line 13 of mitigation. We seem to be back to quantify as the action step for required agricultural practices. And we had a really robust conversation last week in the committee about how quantify was not really the action item that I think we need there for carbon mitigation, climate resilience. So that's one. On the adaptation section, for line 76, there's quite a bit of focus on research again, rather than action related to the wetland benefits. And I want to just point out again that this is a place where we don't need the research. The research has been done. We need to act, and we know wetlands are good for the climate, good for water quality. So let's take action rather than doing more analysis. I'll just say, in contrast, I see in the case of economic development opportunities, I see far more direction to take action than I see research on whether or not those economic development opportunities might actually conflict with the goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And that really concerns me. This is the climate action plan, not the economic development plan for the state of Vermont. And sometimes those are aligned, but sometimes they are not. And our charge here is to do what's right for ecosystems, to make sure that we're rising up to the challenge of the climate crisis. So, just wanted to make sure that we're taking a balanced approach here and not favoring, one over the other. In the section on energy and minerals, materials, not minerals, excuse me. I don't see any changes related to biomass, also reflecting the past conversations that we had in this group, and wanted to make sure that we spend some good time on that today. I'm trusting that will be something that we discuss. On the issue of land use, strategy F, line 27, I am concerned that the old forest targets in Vermont conservation design, a report that this state put a tremendous amount of time and energy into, that you all, I believe, have been very supportive of, including in the climate action plan, that this didn't appear to be rising up. This was referenced just a moment ago, I think, by Cheryl Joy and maybe others. I want to make sure that this is not lost in this conversation. There's not very much in this document about old ecosystems right now, and that is perplexing to me. Because of what we know that they can do for us. And so I really hope to see that there is an emphasis kept in here on maintaining old and restoring wild ecosystems to benefit the state of Vermont. I just also want to flag line 21, which is use value appraisal. There's been a lot of talk for several weeks now of new language coming for this section. I don't see the new language in here. I'm wondering if there is new language that we can look at. And if not, kind of where that is in the stage of development, wondering if there's something that could be more that could be shared about kind of where that is right now.
Thanks,
I think
Zach.
I will just add one last point, which is on I'll save it for the next comment opportunity if need be. But
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
And Annette, do you need something you want to share right now, or is that something that can come at the end as well?
My three comments were kind of interconnected, so I'll finish. Thank you, Cheryl, for making that space for me. So there's a disconnect going on in Vermont between wanting to put development in downtowns and flooding, wanting to exempt Act 250, but in some ways strengthen it. And the other disconnect is that the A&R permits. And so, for instance, under your land use tab, number 5, has a statement about the role of state agency permits in the Act 250 process to create the enterprise capacity necessary to implement new climate. I don't really know what that means. It seems like coded words, perhaps to say give A&R permits greater weight in Act 250. But I want to be very clear that in my work on the ground in Vermont, what I see is that Act 250 is the place that is protecting the environment, and A&R permits are the place that degrade the environment. And they are permits to pollute. And they are getting cranked out in a way that I find really disturbing. And I keep running into these conflicts where A&R is not looking at a global picture. They're looking at a specific site with a specific little issue, and they issue that little permit that has much greater implications that can get looked at Act 250. So I think this number 5 needs to be unpacked. I think that the Act 250 or the A&R permits need to be brought into Act 250 for review rather than being issued outside of the review. And thank you for hearing my comment.
Thanks, Annette. Okay, with that, let's move back into the prioritization conversation. Oh, Judy, go ahead.
Just like to thank and acknowledge the people that hang in there week after week and get a limited time to speak, because I feel so validated when they speak. I feel like the issues I've been bringing up, like downtown Brandon flooding away 7 times in the last 100 years, and wanting to increase downtown Brandon, and the fact that they can't get a town manager. They've had 5 of them since 2011. I feel that those stories are out there, and these people, to me, these people feel like they have connection with those stories. And I'm so glad we get to hear their voices. And I just want to thank them for doing that.
Thank you, Judy. That's great. Okay. Pat, I guess we can hand it back to you if that's okay.
Yep.
And
So
I guess I would just say, just kind of broadly speaking, let me just look at our agenda. We don't have a ton of time left today. We probably have about, 45 minutes to get to this conversation. So I think a few points I'll share. We had the opportunity to go through a ranking process. We have results from that process. So, my hope is that we can kind of just identify outliers that didn't filter out through that process and kind of move on. But if folks feel like we need more conversation, then that's, kind of, we'll hear what folks think at that point. So take it away, Pat.
Okay, so I try to consolidate some, hopefully people can see this. So just a few thoughts about today and then going forward. So I think green, I'm not going to talk about. Yellow, I'm going to assume is fine to leave in because it's good enough unless someone feels strongly. There's a few things I noted that we'll talk about in a second. And orange, I think we need to talk about to figure out whether if someone ranks something low, is it just because they don't think it has a lot of impact, or they actually have a strong disagreement with it? Because it may be then if it's they're not as compelled about the impact, but other people think there is, then maybe we can include it. The other 2 things I would note is that what this ranking data is what's missing, right? What are things really important to people that aren't in here? And that's probably something we can barely touch on today, but maybe we can find a way to send this out and get people to add things that are really, really important to them in some fashion after today. So we'll have to figure out what's missing part. To Judy's point, when I went through this, if I saw as I kind of cleaned stuff up, if I saw a TEK or EJ specific line item, I left it in, even if it wasn't ranked high. I probably missed some, but I tried to capture those so those were not lost. And I added wind. I'll show you where I added that in just a minute so people can see that. Okay, so under mitigation, let me just kind of go through this. Under the first one, there was a number of thing around agroforestry. There's actually 3 different ones. And I wonder if none of them met to the kind of highest ranking, but I do wonder if we folded those into one and included those in our topic here, that it would actually work to kind of fold those 3 blue ones into one and then actually include them in the kind of medium or high ranking to go forward. So that's, if people could just look at that one first and comment. Judy, comment?
I have a question about what's missing. And I guess I'm kind of asking John and Abby this question. It's my experience around where I live that a lot of farmers have, I'm not sure what they're called, but there are these great big ovens out in their backyard and they burn for heat in their house. And they put all the debris from the farm in there. A couple of them I know they specifically order junk mail so they can throw the junk mail in there. Is there any regulation to those kind of furnaces or whatever they're called and farmers, and should that be in here? Because there's that, I don't see any regulation of that, and I don't even know if any regulation exists, but I do see them on farms all the time.
I don't know whether I'm
John,
the one who should answer that, but first of all, there are laws on the books against burning trash. Junk mail is trash. Burning anything other than clean wood is prohibited. Getting somebody to enforce that is a totally different question. You know, as a selectman in my town, we have problems with that, with people burning their trash occasionally. It's an incredibly dangerous thing. There are regulations on outdoor furnaces, and I actually should admit that I regret never building one of those, putting one of those in on my farm, because I have had so much woodland that it would have been very useful. I must admit, I would, when I did it, which would have been 20 years ago, I would have probably not been considering what goes up the chimneys quite so much as I should be. So you live and learn. But there are regulations about those furnaces, and there are far better ones than others on how they burn and how their gases go. But there is laws on the books about trash, and they're just very difficult to enforce.
Judy, anything else on that before I go to Ryan?
Should it be in here someplace that we recommend that there be monitoring? Again, I'm looking to John and Abby because I know around here, I see them only at farms.
I guess I'm open to putting something in here. My guess is that it would be more appropriate because I think it's, the furnaces are, they might be on the farm, but the furnaces are regulated through A&R and through a different, as I understand it, or through DEC, I believe is what, if I'm reading into what Allie posted. And so maybe that's something that needs to go over to cross sector to go into their thinking around building and or advanced wood heating, clean heat standard, whatever they're thinking about over there, which I'm not overly understanding of at the moment.
Abby, what is DEC?
Department of Environmental Conservation.
Okay.
What if we do this? I know this in red as potentially to add either here or potentially under tab C. I wonder if someone could maybe draft an action. And if someone could be one to do that, we can look at it next week. But can someone actually offer to draft that?
Yeah, I would ask how this energy generation question, heat generation question is being handled in maybe another subcommittee. The use of wood products for, generating heat, regardless of whether, there's a lot of places that have boilers that aren't farms. And so I'm not sure if this is an agricultural specific point, if it falls under some of the forestry work we're doing, or if this better falls under the energy generation, heat generation and usage that maybe another committee is handling. So that's my question about this point.
And again, I'm aware, I wonder whether we can include it for now. We can decide if we need to send it off. At this point, it's a little hard to send off to other subcommittees. So I just need someone who could be committed to try to write something up, captured on some of the chat about different regs and the like. So I don't know if someone can offer to draft me something, draft us something.
I mean, my only question, Pat, is as far as I know, there are already regulations on the books. It's, you know, the right, as Ali has posted, you know, there are wood stoves in houses are regulated or are supposed to be. Yes, I'm sure we have thousands of wood stoves in Vermont that are older and don't meet current EPA regulations. I don't know what we do about that. There have been subsidy programs to help that. But, you know, burning trash, boilers have to meet certain emission regulations. You know,
John,
so I'm just
John,
wondering what else we can do.
John, is there funding to monitor it now?
I have no idea. I mean, you know, if you know, we had an issue in Cornwall several years ago of somebody burning a lot of trash all the time, and it took us, you know, the state police said, nope, we're not coming to do that. We're too busy on other things. We did finally get the sheriff to do something, and it stopped, but it took quite a while.
So I guess maybe then the strategy would be to get funding to allow monitoring and enforcement.
Yeah, I'm going to add those words in for now. So I'm going to put in the bottom here, you can kind of see a red edition here. Where it goes, we'll figure out.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Ryan.
Yep.
You.
Okay. Switching gears, I wanted to provide some feedback, hopefully quickly, to try to move on. The 3 in blue, I think they are 2 separate actions and should remain. I think the coordinate with federal NRCS cost share programs is something that in the narrative section is something that already occurs between state programming and our federal partners. And so we may not need to call that out here as an action, and rather just say that runs through our natural working process with them. I do think would strongly advocate for both of those practices to be included. One is an existing ongoing effective program under CREP, and one that fits many of the natural resource project goals that we've heard from a number of members of the subcommittee. And then the second is more of an innovative approach to integrating trees and agriculture, which we've had a lot of support for as well, and for which I think not including that would be a miss. So I would encourage we have 2 separate ones and put the other one in the in a narrative section. One other thing I really wanted to raise was under the Payment for Ecosystem Service Programs for Natural and Working Lands, is that the PES working group or a Payment for Ecosystem Services program in and of itself will be looking to leverage and expand the adoption of practices 4 through rows 4 through 8 to demonstrate additional to bring more additionality to farms and their climate mitigation efforts. So would strongly, based on conversations within the 5C subtask group and just the way in which the program will take those cost-effective and effective, technically feasible with significant co-benefits and leverage their adoption across farms, that PES programming should be there as well as another important goal to highlight. So those would be my 2 thoughts at this time for the mitigation side. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So I'm trying to kind of capture this as we go, including red sort of suggestions or changes. So I have a question about this one here. 13 is develop programs for tracking.
Yeah, sorry, that was the
okay.
The third one. The Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division does track the use and regulate the use of many economic poisons and other substances that are regulated, out of federal and state law. The contributions to climate change are, from, fertilizers as an example, is tracked in the emissions inventory currently. And I think that there is a new working group from the last legislative session, which I think can pretty effectively help to advance the conversation in this area. It's legislatively mandated and it'll have many stakeholders. And so I wonder if that working group process and the recommendations that come out of it would help give some grist to that topic if folks wanted a way to speak about that. But I was just trying to say it is regulated and there is new programming to try to address that. So trying to reflect the language to either leverage that process or just speak to, if it's not in here, it's something that's already happening. I don't have an opinion about whether to call it out or not.
I'll go for it. This is important to you. Abby Course.
Sorry. Judy, is your hand, I don't want to cut in front of you.
No, I forget to take it down.
I was just going to say, Ryan, is it regulated and or quantified across all sectors or just agriculture?
Oh yeah, all sectors that use registered products.
I just know that one of the first things we had to do for organic certification was walk around to telephone poles and take them down to give them to GMP so that there wouldn't be spraying within a 50-foot buffer of our land. And so I just want to make sure that that's being captured somewhere, particularly as we're looking at increased electrification, what the consequences could potentially be to the pesticide load if that is the methodology that the power companies choose to use to try to control tree cover for increased electrification. And I'm just wanting to make sure that that's captured somewhere. I sometimes think we focus on the ag part of pesticides within some of this and don't think about the use within municipalities, playgrounds, soccer fields, et cetera, and really wanting us to start thinking about that on a much broader level.
And I guess the question is if people may have, again, I to add some language, but if people feel strongly this shouldn't be included, let us know. But otherwise, I wonder if we should just include it, given that there were 2 highs and 1 low. But again, if someone thinks it should not be included, let's drop it and we can talk about it. But if people don't feel strongly, I would say let's leave it in. Ryan, you were about to say?
I think we need to retitle that strategy.
So maybe we need some work on the language itself. Okay. So Abby and Brian, I'll note that. Okay, Ryan and okay, many misspellings. All right, the next one, I think I want to see whether this is the low is about it doesn't have impact or that it's controversial. So this is the leverage market-based solutions. The only strategy, the only action that kind of made it to the higher rankings so far was this one about incentivized in-state purchase of carbon credits developed by Vermont-based or regional carbon projects. And we had a long conversation about whether it should be national, regional only, et cetera. This is the one that kind of surfaced, but we do have a low ranking by one party. So I don't know whether it's okay to include or people feel strongly it should not be included. It's specific to Vermont-based carbon credits. Charlie.
Yeah, I think 2 things here. One, I think, the other actions under that strategy are no longer with us, which I think I'd like to discuss at some point. But this specific action was pegged to the other ones. So if we're going to blow all those away, then this one doesn't really make any sense to have in here.
Yeah, I would like to add back I suggest we add back some of the strategies and actions related to those ecological services and paying for them for forest landowners.
Where did those go?
They just didn't. They were mixed rankings, so they didn't surface to this level.
Oh.
Either rankings were all over the place or they weren't high.
Yeah, and I apologize, Pat. I guess I wasn't clear. I was hoping we would have all the pathways just kind of organized by high, medium, low, then everything that wasn't ranked. So we had it all in one place to kind of pull stuff up. But hopefully folks have access to the other spreadsheets so they can kind of just identify things that are missing.
Yeah, and sorry about that, Billy. again, then there's a number of places where, again, they just stuff, it may be important that just didn't meet these criteria, so they're not there. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be. All right, so I've noted that for now. I think that's good. And then in the bottom one, increased tree coverage. The only one that I had a high and a low, I wasn't sure what to make of it, is increased funding to tree planting via the renewable energy standard. And I wasn't sure what the low, whether the low was it wouldn't have impact or someone didn't like that a particular approach. I just wasn't, I wasn't sure what that low meant. And if people feel that's not important, people feel that is important, it kind of adds to the two above it if you value those things.
If no one's speaking up, I think it's probably fine to leave it where it's at and let's just move on.
Okay. Good. All right, so let's just talk about next steps. So there's a few, there's a missing one potentially that Judy raised. There's some language changes in one. There's some carbon and PS market questions there. There's a few things that Ryan mentioned. So what we can do is fold this all back in, I guess, where to from here. So the question is what's missing, right? What are the things other people think that are missing from this sheet? So the question is, how best do we proceed, not only on this one, but going forward for how to add back in stuff that is very important to people. Not everything, but what's more important.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes sense to just kind of do what we just did with this tab for at least the adaptation and land use ones, which also have a lot of comments, so folks can we can discuss those as a group. I think at some point I suggest we're gonna need a smaller group to come together and kind of wrap this up, since this prioritization didn't seem to yield the results that clear results that folks were hoping for. But since we do have the group together here and we still have another hour, we may want to go to the other big tabs and just see if there's anything that's included that folks feel strongly against, or if there's things explicitly missing from the higher ranked items.
Great. All right. Let's.
Well, it's hard to know though what is missing since they've been pulled out of here.
Yep.
I appreciate the highlighting color and trying to do this for reducing what we're trying to cover in this next 30 minutes, but without seeing those, it's hard to understand. And not colored, they could just still say the letters with no background color, but that's helpful, especially since some of them, kind of to Charlie's point earlier, are sequential and are reliant upon some of the other actions also taking place.
So and why don't we just pull up the original sheet? I'm sorry, Pat, to have had you do that task.
No, I think
maybe
it's for discussion purposes, not for full vetting. Here, I have a thought to Lauren's point. The colors do give us a bit of discussion focus for now. What I could do, and we can do it differently, is I can take kind of the findings from the broad discussion, fold them back into the full spreadsheet. So make some, like these things would end up being green, for instance. And then everything else would be in there. And then the question would be, what would be the process of trying to elevate further things? But if people want to do that now, we can certainly go back to the other bigger spreadsheet. Judy.
I prefer to be working with something that shows everything, because personally I had a week with no time, and to make this out was not a possibility. So we're reacting to what is high and what is low to the responses of a few people, and 5, 6, whatever it is. And so I would really like to see them all and react to all of them.
So let's do this. So Marion, because I think I want to make sure I'm just managing the names appropriate. So Marion, I don't know if you can pull up the piece you just redid. We can go back to the Ag Eco one and take a look at the whole.
Yeah, I just closed it. Give me a second.
Okay. Great.
And I would suggest that we, move on to adaptation, then land use, and then, time permitting, go to some of the other tabs, but open to other suggestions.
Okay. All right. Let's see. This is, which tab is that? That's if we can go to, do we want to go back to mitigation to look at the whole thing for a minute?
I thought Billy said he wanted to start with adaptation. No,
It's up to the group. I thought we had just gone through through the mitigation tab. If folks feel the need to go back to that, that's fine. I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah. Well, why don't, if people are, let's take a quick look at this and see what people think. This is mitigation. You can see some things that were, kind of ranked within our color because the ranking was more all over the place. A few of the other things we've covered, not all of them. And those three under 13, 14, 15, I think we've already addressed. That's good. There is 10, I think we covered that one. And then 11 was kind of people may want to know what they want to do with number 11. Because but for one low, it has both high and mediums. Now it's pollination habitat, wildlife habitat, biodiversity.
Like I said, that's traditional ecological knowledge. You cannot have a healthy cultivated garden without a healthy wild garden. We have to leave something in there, whether it's worded this way or not. But we're never going to have a healthy cultivated garden if we don't. The predators of the bugs that eat what's in the cultivated garden wouldn't have a predator if it wasn't for the wild gardens. That's where they live.
Yeah. So unless someone disagrees, I think let's highlight this maybe in yellow, just for, I don't know, Marion, if you can do that, because I think this is one that, and most people disagree, I expect many people would support what Judy said. Alyssa?
Sorry, which one do you want me to highlight in yellow?
Number 11. Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I didn't rank this tab, and I would have given this a low cost, high impact rating with lots of co-benefits. So I'm in favor of including it.
And then on the agroforestry, we've already addressed that previously, so we'll tend to the coloring in our next round afterwards today. Okay, let's go down below further if we could. Okay, this is a create a system for tracking metrics and the like. And I think part of the reasons these didn't necessarily rank as high is because it's more about TA and creating systems for tracking. It's not necessarily direct action. So, and Lauren had brought up sometimes these things get ranked lower than maybe they should. There's also the inventory business that we had probably some range of views on. So any quick thoughts on this? If it takes too long, we may have to come back to it, but.
Which line specifically are you looking for comment on?
Thank you. It's 24, 25, and 26.
I personally see all of those as low cost, high potential impact down the road in terms of understanding where we are things, but
25 and 26 are already being addressed in the RFI and RFP for the updated inventory, I believe. Is that correct, Ryan?
Yes, I think the RFP provides a process to research this. I think as far as an action for quantifying co-benefits and having a place to write this out, I think we want to make sure that these actions that have persisted in our discussions for some time are reflected, under the how to quantify and leverage this. Whether that makes it into an action table, I think it's represented by the RFP at this point. But we also want to make sure that it's included either in the emissions inventory discussion section. So this may be an important point for a one-liner on future research and refinements that are needed for this space.
So
not only emission tracking, but also mitigation tracking.
So it seems like 25, 26 are already actually recommended and included. So I wonder if we in some ways those are taken care of. 24, Ryan, I think you're asking that should be included, correct?
Oh, I was thinking more trying to put them all under one topic of ongoing research that's reflected by the RFP.
Okay. So
the need to.
So does that mean we could strike these from this because it's already tended to elsewhere or not?
No, I would want to make sure we track this as a important strategy for quantifying mitigation efforts in this sector.
Okay, great. All right.
I think we have the good work happening in this space, but I think we still want to have that called out to some degree.
Okay, All right, down, I think we already talked some about PS. There are some other things in there that I think, again, we're gonna have to figure out what to do with as we go forward. But I'll note that. I think for the number that, so I think on line 27 through 33, we've already got some stuff already in there. We want to elevate number 28, as Ryan said earlier. Some of these other things maybe got moved. We need to look at where they actually are. But 34, which is 34 through 37, again, we already talked about the chemicals. There was a thing about food waste, and there was also a thing about sort of organic diversions, and those just, they were kind of a mixed bag. So I wasn't sure if they need to be elevated to, again, they're still going to be in the matrix, but they need to be elevated to a higher, to the actual writing of the document.
If we're actually looking to try to accomplish emissions reductions, food waste, as I understand it, is one of the more effective mitigation possibilities in that regard. So it seems like it would make sense to be elevated, but defer to others' thoughts on that.
Any other thoughts on that in addition to Abby's?
Yeah, the life cycle analysis question, that's another RFI that Science and Data is putting out, looking at all stages of use and what the emissions are. Food waste is a huge component of agriculture and our food systems footprint. How to elevate that, whether it's supply chain work, personal, I forget how it was framed within last week about personal choices or individual choices, but I do think that there is a role for how food waste is, considered in this plan, and acknowledging that this is a large source, and it's not necessarily the agricultural production that's causing this. It's perhaps more on the distribution and access side of things. It is important. Not sure how to turn that into an actionable, a pithy, quick action. It's a very obviously complicated topic, but it is important, absolutely.
Can I just jump in here real quick, Pat? We don't have a lot of time left today. We've got about a week or two to finish this whole exercise and deliver recommendations to the council. We've been working on developing actions for a number of months now. And I think at this point, if we don't have stuff, we don't have it. And I think we really need to move on unless there's really critical things that people believe should not be included or are missing. We can talk forever about opportunities in this space. So I would really suggest we focus on things that are critically either missing or shouldn't be included. If others feel otherwise, I'm happy to yield to that, but that's my recommendation for the group.
And I think a simple fix for this one is I think the title of the strategy is not quite right, because it actually applies to folks outside of farms and foresters in some cases, like electric companies, as Abby mentioned earlier. 36 and 37 could be combined, and then you've got something specific, maybe not everything you'd like, but you have something on food waste. Let me just kind of go down. I know that you already mentioned folks, and Bill, I'm hearing your point about trying to get to some of these others. We know there's some things about markets people want to add back in. We'll have to look up about that together as a group, because I know it's been somewhat controversial. And then going down to, that we'll have to come back to, I'm sure, under increasing tree coverage, or just a number of things that just, I don't necessarily are controversial, but didn't necessarily rank as high. So we can see which of those people think are most valuable. Maybe we've already got it, and the other ones can just sit in the existing matrix. And again, Judy, I'm also just paying attention to where they made TEK in here in particular, which we'll need to look out for.
Well, yeah, because Burlington is high on the list now for urban heat island. And so planting trees in the green areas and creating parks is going to be important to get that heat out of those communities. And they're all communities that are pushed to the margins of town.
And I wonder what we want to make sure is, and I think it applies to us, is we also make sure there's just a tree planting action around urban areas, which we may be missing. I'm not sure. I think it's actually 55 is the one that maybe we want to fold back in, because it gets to the point you just said, Judy. 55.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great, exactly. As Ali pointed out, 52 is an urban one as well, so we can think about elevating a few of those urban ones. Thanks, Ali. Okay, so we have some notational work to do. We'll come back to how we're going to do it. So again,
Pat, before you move to the next one, I'd like to recommend that we go to land use next. I think that's probably the one that will have the least amount of consensus. And I think you said the most amount of people reviewed it. So that's clearly where a lot of the interest lies. And given lack of time, I'd like to see us go there next.
good. All right. I think unless someone disagrees, let's just do it. Let's go to land use. Okay, just a quick thing. Marion, I know, what time do you have to leave?
11:45.
Okay, we actually are okay with you because we're going to have to switch over to the carbon budget at that point anyway.
Okay.
Okay, on to land use. All right. So again, if it's green or yellow, I'm going to assume it's good. So here, and we also got some public comments. So under 6, 7, and 8, we had a lot of folks rank these as high, but at least one person ranked them as low. And I don't know whether that's because they don't think it will have impact or because they actually don't agree. So we're looking at amending Act 2050 to exempt certain centers, reduce regulation of development in downtowns and villages to cluster development, incentivize required growth in town centers. And I think, you know, point Judy and others have made is there's also this countervailing thing. Well, do you want to increase compact development where you're going to constantly be flooding? So what do people think about 6, 7, and 8?
What happened to the one we had where people were, we had discussion around, people were concerned about opening Act 250 for discussion, and maybe there should be an Act 251. What happened to that?
Does anybody know whether that was a specific action or where that went?
Not really following. I think these are the 3 Act 250 recommendations that came out of our process.
But there was some concerns about if it got opened, what might happen to it. There was discussion around that.
We might have never resolved that, Judy. That's possible. I think, you know, these are all similar, but they are certainly, you know, opening, changing Act 250 and or related things. So curious where we're at, whether we have, again, disagreement we need to hash through or not on this question.
I will admit, I have concerns about some of the Act 250 recommendations, but I'm not. I don't have any magical solutions at this point. I think there's just a really impossible issue when you're trying to both conserve, you know, work with reducing forest fragmentation and flood mitigation and all of those different things. And then you just end up with the question of where do the people go, and they're already there. And all those are really complicated questions. And I don't feel like, I don't know.
Again, other thoughts on this? You know, it could be that it's not as actionable, but it could be more focused on what, you know, is that what you're trying to say is we really want to manage sort of regulatory incentives in a way that you cluster development in villages and the like where it makes sense, and you don't where in terms of flooding risk and the like it doesn't. And maybe there's a broader statement you need from 6, 7, and 8 versus the specifics. I don't know. Other thoughts on this one right now?
These appear to have ranked high by the people who scored them. They've been in,
that's right,
in our thing the entire time. So you know, we can set this aside for a vote or something at a future meeting, but I don't know what we're going to accomplish today.
Okay. And maybe we note that that's where they are for now. We may have to come back to these. And the orange might signal conflict. It might not. We don't always know. Okay. Again, I think this is clearly the other thing we need to figure out in all of our time left is also how to figure out which of these issues we really want with Kaya to really work through in more detail on equity. Whether this is one or not, I don't know. Okay, let's go down to plan and manage natural and working lands, the next one. So
before you do, I don't know if it's appropriate to like put a plug in for that bottom one that didn't get highlighted. But I think instead of always trying to recommend new programs and new funding streams, that tweaking existing ones to make sure that they're incorporating climate change criteria or a lot of things that you'll see throughout this spreadsheet in different in the different tabs is actually a really valuable thing and something that could be managed across many of the state agencies and the different funding programs that they have, as well as their regulatory capacity. So I don't know. I don't know why that one isn't necessarily highlighted. There's a lot of high and a medium. I'd be curious to see if the two lows were actually medium all the way across, since that's now ranking low. But I think that's a really easy lever for us to be making, and something that would direct state agencies to start making sure they're constantly considering climate change and how their regulatory capacity and programs can help.
You're sticky on it.
Buddy, could you mute their line, please, if they're I don't know what, okay.
I would totally, I see that Alyssa wrote that too, but I completely agree with what Lauren just said. I think that definitely needs to be elevated.
Okay, so I think let's just, Marion, if you're willing to highlight that in yellow, I think it's, we can treat it as a yellow and have it kind of kicked up to that level. Okay. All right. The next one is about planning for managing natural working lands, biodiversity, and resilience. The no net loss. David Mears also sent out a piece about not only no net loss, but actually net gain. That one clearly stayed in as a high ranking across the board. There are some other things that were just kind of mixed. One of them is, I think, the forest land for fire encompassing is partly related to TEK. So Charlie, go ahead.
Thanks. I was just going to say, under this strategy, the ones that I would call out for elevating or more discussion, the line 12, the one around statewide planning efforts, you know, it ranked out. I actually know how it ranked out. It's got highs, it's got lows, it's got mediums, but that's one I think that we should definitely keep in here. Some of that's already happening to some degree, but I think we need to keep going with that. And then lines either 74 or 16, depending on how you look at it. The UVA one, granted, that might not be fully baked yet, but if we don't have a recommendation around UVA in here, I don't know what we're doing. I mean, like, that's private forest land in Vermont. And so if we're not looking at the program that has the biggest impact on private forest land in Vermont, then we're like totally missing the mark. So like that needs to be in here. Granted, we can still massage it, work on it, but to not elevate that, I think we would just be, you know, missing the mark.
So I'm going to suggest that if someone objects, just raise your hand, but I'm going to say line 12, let's treat as yellow. We could. Great. And let's also do the same for 16, recognizing we have to look at the language again, but there. And then Judy, I want to know if line 66, support efforts by passively managing forest land by fire encompassing, if we should elevate that to a yellow too. And Judy, you're on mute.
I think so, but I don't know about all the Smokey the Bear followers.
Let's put that in yellow unless again someone disagrees that line there. Okay.
Patrick, I have a question about, I don't know what number it is. The first one right below the pink.
12, I think, that one there. Okay.
That one. Improve statewide planning efforts. Improve efforts to develop an action plan by A&R. We're going to let A&R develop that action plan.
The agency manages most state lands. I think that's the context.
I understand that, Billy, but the people who have complained about what the management A&R is doing has been great on these calls. So are we going to put somebody in charge of this who hasn't successfully done it? Are we going to word it that way so that we just say, here's another thing for you to work on? Or are we going to add something into it that controls how A&R and what A&R does in creating this plan? I'm sorry to be so bold, but.
Well, I think there's clear directives in this action to accomplish the targets that are set forth in Vermont Conservation Design. That's what A&R is being tasked to do here.
I understand that too. But I also see this process happening because there's no time. Half of it is getting condensed or left out or quickly approved simply because there's no time.
Yeah, I don't have an opinion one way or the other about this action. So if the group wants to get rid of it, it's fine with me.
I'm not saying to get rid of it. I'm asking to put curbs on the edge of the development of an action plan by A&R. Can it be something like the development of an action plan by A&R with input from XYZ or something like that is all I'm asking.
Why don't we just underline 12, maybe we can just note Mary to add like with with public engagement or something to those lines.
Yes, exactly.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good. All right, moving down now, line 17 and 18. And I don't know why these ones, again, there was a low ranking, otherwise they were ranked actually pretty high. So I just don't know whether these are controversial or we can and raise those up just because the low is maybe low impact, but not of concern.
I would certainly support 18 being raised up. I think a lot of folks have spoken to the concern about flooding. So I think that's a critical path piece for us.
Anybody disagree with that? And leaving it in orange, we'll note that it has to kind of, we'll turn it into a yellow or a yellow green. At the end of the day, will mean the same because it'll be listed in the actual plan. What about 17? Identify priority natural working lands. Is that a high priority or is that maybe something that could be done but isn't necessarily going to rise to the top for us? Line 17 or ID 98.
I think it's one of those a bit of a low hanging fruit. I think I think it makes sense if we have the ability to elevate it to do it because I think could be done within the framework of existing programs and data that we already have. It's just a matter of getting it done. But
so maybe then we leave it.
I agree with that because of that equity component too, and the high urban heat index that you see in Burlington. It just seems like that creating more and conserving more green space in those areas would help.
Good. All right. So I think orange is no. If we leave it in orange, that means we will turn that into essentially a higher ranking. So we'll note this as we go. So those are gonna stay in for the reasons we just stated. All right, I do want to jump to the next one, which is increase in strategic conservation, because I think that there was public comment, and I think we need to have some discussion about this. So there were two, and one was only ranked by one, but it showed up medium, so I left it. So there's two or three here that are staying in at this point. But there was, for instance, the line 27 with some very specific goals. There may be some other things in here that people feel are important to do.
I would recommend 27 and 32 remain elevated.
27, okay. And
Billy literally took the words out of my mouth. That was exactly what I was going to say.
Right, we're going to mark those as yellow. And again, if someone disagrees, we'll talk. So, Charlie.
Yeah, just agree with 27, 32, and I would also put 24 back in, and potentially we could expand it beyond just whisper, but the work that's been done thinking really innovatively about how to use the state clean water revolving fund for land conservation has been like just amazing. And it's been innovative. It's gotten a lot of great work done. I don't know if Marley's on the call, but I think she was involved with some of this stuff. So I really do think about how we can use those funds to increase the pace of land protection is really important. So I would advocate to leave 24 elevated.
Okay.
I agree with that. And I think that's a good one, maybe not to flag for the equity conversation next week, but it's really inaccessible right now, especially for rural communities with very limited staff capacity at the town scale to navigate like a really complicated program that ideally would be able to better and more quickly move money, and not just to those towns that have have capacity in-house to do so.
And one, if Kai is still on the phone real quickly, that might, because that's a very specific program, that might be a really good one to do an equity analysis on, because you can look at it. Kai has something very tangible to look at. But Kaya, I don't know if you have a quick thought on being able on that kind of a specific thing, whether that makes sense as part of our conversation next week.
Yes, for certain. So, I mean, if there's one that we want to take and walk through, I think that's something to also speak with the chairs around. I think it was my understanding we were going to go through biomass specifically as our group activity, but then we can absolutely break out into that one.
Okay. I think biomass is absolutely on the list. And then I want to go to the create 29, create a statewide environmental justice policy. My suggestion is we should elevate that. I don't know whether it goes here in terms of the order, but it seems like that was one that the group, I think, already supports. So I wonder if we should, we might have language in multiple places, but I wonder if that's one thing we should elevate as well for 29 for equity's sake.
I think we should.
Again, if somebody disagrees, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of keep us moving. Charlie, did you have another point?
Well, I just wanted to the point about discussing biomass next week with an equity lens. I think we definitely need to do that. I think maybe a first step would be a broader discussion of what we mean by biomass, because one of the things that we've had some trouble with here is teasing out whether we're talking about electrical generation, thermal heat, large scale, small scale. So if we're going to do an equity screen, which I think we should, I think we also need to kind of be more clear about what we're talking about when we talk about the use of wood for those purposes. Otherwise, the conversation is going to be really scattered. Thanks.
And for now, because I don't want to do biomass now just because of time, but we are going to do it next week and we're going to have to spend some time on it. So I think, Charlie, to that point, maybe to the co-chairs, some advice along with Kai about how to frame up like clear terms of art or terms of definition before we then get into the rich discussion.
My suggestion is that we address the largest polluters in this state first, and then go down from there.
And one of the things we haven't, to Judy's good point she made, we really haven't talked about potentially a hierarchy of action, right, or a roadmap, and that would be an example of the roadmap where you start there. Okay, let's go down to the 35, the increased technical assistance. Thanks, Marion, so much.
I would suggest that 36 be elevated. That report is done. There's a lot of really well-baked and thought through recommendations there. And I think it's a resource that we might want to take advantage of.
Charlie, go ahead.
Well, that's an old hand, I guess, but I agree with Billy on that one.
Okay. All right. As we got to go there, if people want to advocate for something, let me know. Otherwise, we'll keep moving. Okay, the next one is kind of interesting because we had a lot of discussion about solar, and then Judy had added good things about wind, but none of these actually rose to a higher ranking for now. So I don't know what that means, but they were kind of all over the place, and so none of these actually got colored for the way you can see that they're ranked. So I don't know what you want to do with these. We certainly had a lot of discussion, but they didn't, in the individual ranking, that's where they ended up.
I personally feel that the ones that are incentivizing better siting should certainly stay in 40 and 43. I think there's value to all of these, but as far as actionable items, those are ones that I think are important.
Other folks, what are your thoughts? Judy, I know you worked on some of these too.
I did. Yeah, I think we definitely need to consider, if we're going to be using solar as a transitional thing, we need to consider how their materials are harvested and where they come from to build these. Just like we did when we started considering packaging and limiting what goes in a packaged product. We can't just put these things up and then worry about how we're going to recycle them afterwards. In 20 years, all we've done is kick the can down the road. We need to keep thinking about what's going to work. I mean, I really like the idea of putting them in parking lots like Echo did, and and UMass Amherst did. I mean, rather than just seeing them in a field, but we got to go deeper than that. We've got to think about what's happening in the future with them. We have no way to recycle them in a sustainable way.
So I think what I'm hearing is at least on 40 and 43, that we actually, we elevate those to, again, a yellow for lack of a better term, just so we note those.
Yes.
And we're certainly working with the industry to try to come up with better processes around recycling and reuse of panels and batteries. So if we want to add an action related to that, you know, I think that would support those efforts.
Well, and that actually gets to let's actually go down. So there's some strategies that people rank, but I think we were going to refer them to rural resilience that were much more specific on the built environment. But there were some things we moved to pathway C, like recycling. About the point, I'm not sure what the point Judy made is exactly captured in here about wind materials, which probably needs to go in here. And those things are in now, they're in tab C. I don't think they actually didn't rise to a higher ranking at this point, but we may have to go back to tab C to explore that. Allie.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting an error that my camera won't work, so I don't know what's going on. But I just wanted to, is one thing I noticed with the conversation about biomass, McNeil, and Rygate, something that I realized we're missing. We have no action or strategy around fossil fuel pipelines. I'm just putting that out there. You know, there's the Rutland-Addison pipeline, and there was recently, you know, out of compliance. It wasn't buried deep enough. You know, Massachusetts had an explosion of a natural gas pipeline. Just putting that out there. I don't know if that's something, because they often go through agricultural lands or public lands, as they have in Addison County. So it doesn't really fit here, but I just wanted to flag that as something I saw potentially missing.
Okay. If it's important to people, we can maybe find a way to add in. To Billy's point, we're kind of well in the way, so I'm a little anxious about adding new stuff at this point, but certainly a fair point. Okay. So that was relatively efficient, actually. So we've elevated a number of things. We've got to clean up to do some things from other sections. I wonder if we want to go back in about the 10 minutes that we have left before 11:45.
Can you scroll back up to that section you just quickly scrolled out of?
You bet. That's one above there. It is 40. Go up. Yeah, I think that's it, right? Judy, you want to go up higher, right? You want to go to like line 40. I think Marion, line 41 through whatever. There we go. Yeah, there. Good.
Reduce the amount of human consumption of waste and energy used. Is that not an automatic yellow or green or whatever?
Pick a color.
Is that not something we want people to do no matter what?
Lauren.
Oh, my hand was already up, so if somebody wants to respond to.
Oh, sorry, I missed you. Yeah. So again,
well, actually, while I have the mic, Judy, I would say absolutely. I think my only issue with this as written is it's not really actionable. I mean, it's more like a recommendation to individuals, which is fine. There's no like real teeth to this. It's just like we need to reduce, which is kind of like, of course we do. And if we want to see if there's an opportunity to make that more explicit or actionable, I'd love to see that happen. But right now, it's
there's lots of ways. I mean, think about Lauren, the people we talk to at the middle school institutions, they can't teach about climate change in their school because their community won't let them. So let's make a recommendation that this is taught in our schools.
Yeah, there actually is one on the education tab that says just that, Judy.
So then there are strategies that go with it or actions that go with it.
I have a question with in cross sector, whether they discussed kind of human consumption. I assume they discussed energy efficiency, but whether they actually addressed like reducing consumption overall, and then had specific recommendations for that. Does anybody know whether that got covered there?
I did not see that discussed in 14 hours.
Marion, for now, sorry.
They do have actions related in the transportation space around reducing driving broadly and in that way, but not not broadly around consumption, but there's a lot of talk about the recognition that they can't meet the 2050 requirement without just ramping down overall driving.
And one thing I'll add, sorry, I can't raise my hand while I'm sharing a screen, is Lauren noted this seems like an individual action, and I'll just remind folks that you have the opportunity to pull individual actions out, and they'll be included in the implementation section in a write-up of all actions that, sorry, not implementation section, a different section, but it'll be a write-up of all of the actions that individuals can take. So what do you as a Vermonter can do? And if you all wanted to rephrase this, understanding that, like Judy, your point about education is captured in the education section. If you wanted this one to be more focused on individual action, you don't even have to prioritize it. We could pull it out and include it in that section in the cap. So just one idea if you want to keep this in, but that could be one way to fit it in.
Well, I think it should be in. I don't think education is the only thing we should do. I just think this isn't a left brain, right brain thinking thing. This is an automatic thing that everybody should be doing. And at the state level, at the town level, at the neighborhood level. So there's lots of things. Education isn't the only thing. It just needs to be in everybody's face. And it needs to be an automatic thing that people do, not well, let's put it and teach them about it. That's only one action, right?
Marion, I wonder if we could put a notation under comment on 41 that just says we got to make this more actionable, and then we'll figure out if we can find some ways to do that. So it'll be education, but more, as Judy said. Jake.
Yeah, so sort of two lines of thinking on that. So, as written, and somewhat the point that Judy's making is there's sort of a value statement that's being made, and I'm just curious if there will be some kind of statement to that effect in the cap, or in sort of how it's written, expressing these notions that are, I think, important kind of universal pieces to convey to ourselves and to the public. And then I think, talking about sort of the specifics of how to make this actionable, certainly there are educational avenues, programs, waste reduction sort of strategies that exist in the state of Vermont that we could kind of think about, whether those things need greater resource allocation or elevating sort of their presence in various ways through education and outreach. So I think there are sort of tangible connections to how that value statement could actually manifest as a real strategy and action. And there may be in other subcommittees kind of recommendations to that effect.
Jane or Marion, can you just kind of speak to the overall kind of value point here, and then we'll continue to work on this in a specific way. And then I'll go to Lauren.
Sorry, I didn't hear it all.
No, I think the main thing is, I think to Jake's point and others is, maybe we may or may not have specific actions to this point, but is there an overall value statement in the cap that will say something about part of the story here is for us all to reduce our consumption and reduce our waste. So there's going to be kind of any value statement in the cap itself.
Yes, I could see how that would be really important. And I can't actually think exactly where that will go, but I imagine I can think about that for a little bit and speak back to it. Yeah, and Abby says it'll clearly be in the narrative around your section, but it should clearly be in the narrative for cross-sector, I imagine, too, as well as more broadly for the whole climate action plan. So.
Right, good. So I think we'll need to address this in a number of ways. Lauren, over to you.
I hate to make this recommendation because I'm sure it's going to mean more work for somebody that is likely not me, and yet I'm going to make it anyway. I still feel very strongly that if all of the 4 foundational criteria are either medium or are all medium and yes, the overall ranking should be medium. I was looking at, if you scroll up, Marion, to the previous strategy, funding RPC staff to make sure that we can implement Act 171. I was like, wow, I'm surprised that one didn't make it. And I looked at my column knowing which of these I am, and I see that I'm one of the lows, but mine was, of course, medium all the way across. And I just wonder how many of these have fallen the wayside because it's showing low, even though it's medium all the way. And I don't know if that's even a recommendation we can make this late in the game, but I'm still very confused why all medium would result in a low ranking overall.
Lauren, I think the way this group can handle that, because is to find those things that are important to you that you think rank that way that should be elevated, and we just elevate them. Even though it's a little hard, I know I have to go backwards to look at the ranking and the formula, but I think probably rather than try to change the formula at this point, which was kind of across the process as a whole, I think we should just elevate those things that you think meet that medium criteria, whether or not the ranking rubric worked quite as it should have. I don't know how you think of, I don't know how you feel about that, but that would be my sense of how to handle it. Are you okay with that?
Well, I guess I just wonder why it would be so hard to change the formula at this point in time. If it's just the overall, it doesn't require anybody to reassess. If everyone put in medium, you can just change the algorithm so that it should say medium instead of low. Or I guess I'm confused why I'm the only one that thinks it's strange that anything that's all medium would be low.
So I guess I would just jump in and say not everyone ranked everything. So the ranking is imperfect regardless. We as a group have decided we want the whole subcommittee to decide what gets elevated. So I think Pat's suggestion, if people think something's missing, we just elevate it. And I think that's going to be the most effective strategy to get to the outcome we need at this point.
So the ask then is for all of us to go back, and those of us that ranked something medium all the way across should potentially change it to a medium and send it in.
I think we pretty much have to say, but I think the better thing to do is we're going to get up what we've done so far cleaned up, and then we have to figure out how to move forward to kind of move through the rest of these things, and including elevating things that you or others think are important because, say, the ranking system wasn't perfect. I mean, we could have people go back and try to redo it. I mean, it's up to you all. I'm worried about, it might be better to focus the discussion.
I know personally what I did was just look to see what was missing that I thought was really important and tag them. There's certainly things that I'd ranked higher, but they weren't high priority. It wasn't a critical piece for me, but I defer to the group on how you want to do it. I'm just mindful of how much time we have to wrap this process up.
I'm aware we want to leave time for the carbon budget. So I've got 2 more hands up, and then we got a bunch of things we need to kind of try to cover at the end for process. So Judy and John, and then I'm going to hand it back on carbon budget. Judy.
So number 39, we talked a little bit about this one. Could we change minimize and mitigate to avoid and mitigate?
Everybody okay with that? So, avoid, and where you can't avoid, mitigate, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody concerned about that? Otherwise,
or avoid. I don't know. Avoid and minimize.
There's, the standard framework is avoid, minimize, and where you can't do those 2 things, mitigate. So we could just say avoid, minimize, and mitigate.
Avoid, minimize, and mitigate.
Yeah, exactly. It's avoid your first line of defense, so to speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John.
I'm just agreeing with Lauren. I mean, I know yesterday when I was doing this ranking, I was sort of interested when I did certain things, and it ended up as a sort of a low or a high, and I naively didn't investigate it as thoroughly as Lauren did. I am going to go back and look at what I did and see where things add up differently than what I really feel. So it's been more of an exercise, but it is sort of frustrating to have it pointed out now.
Alyssa, you had a comment in chat? I just want to make sure I captured what you meant, Alyssa.
I just put that comment at that moment to support what Lauren was suggesting, that there's really no reason we couldn't go back and change the prioritization. I don't need to derail the process. I know we're short on time.
No, it's okay. Well, let me dwell on this for 10 minutes while you all talk about the carbon budget, and then we'll come back to how we move forward, including the point Lauren made. Okay. So carbon budget, back to Bill, you and Abby.
Thank you. So I think Ryan and Ali are gonna give us a quick run through of the draft carbon budget. I shared it in advance of this meeting with folks. Here's an opportunity to kind of ask questions, raise any issues with it. I think then next week, we're gonna come back with a specific recommendation for the subcommittee on how to act, ideally in support for the budget, if that's the direction folks wanna go, along with any additional recommended actions or next steps associated with carbon budgeting for climate. So I'll pass it over to Ryan.
And I'll pass it over to Ali, who's going to lead us through most of the presentations. Thanks, Ali.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, sorry again. I don't know. I'm getting an error that my my camera is not working. So don't have that. But let me just get this going in display mode. Oh boy. IT just updated my computer and I'm to the new Windows and this is not working. I think I'm just frozen. Ah, frick. Okay, there we go. Can people see that?
Yes, now
sure can.
All right, sorry. Yeah, like I said, I having some issues with Windows, I think. All right, so this is really quick. We had about 45 minutes allocated for this, and as you can see, we have a lot less than that. So I'm sort of going to breeze through this really fast, and I apologize for that, but it's really supposed to just be sort of an overview primer of what the carbon budget is and isn't, what's contained in it. And you all have been given the PDF of the carbon budget to dive into, and we'll discuss it more next week. So I apologize that I don't think we're going to have a lot of time for discussion. What is the carbon budget? It was designed to be a really high-level, comprehensive picture of the carbon stocks and fluxes in Vermont. So stocks are really just, the amount that has been stored over time in forests, trees, soils, agricultural soils, wetland soils, all sorts of different parts of our natural and working lands. And fluxes are the emissions and sequestration. The combination is the net flux and net change in stock over time. And that's really, we're sort of trying to get a picture of Vermont's contribution to atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, to be really holistic. Really, what does, quote unquote, the atmosphere see from all the things we do here in Vermont? So it's not the same as the Vermont Greenhouse Gas Inventory that's conducted annually by the Agency of Natural Resources, DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation. That is what is being used for goal setting for the Global Warming Solutions Act emission reductions targets. Okay, so that's sort of different. That includes what are called, quote unquote, anthropogenic sources. So they are like electricity generation, transportation, heating, waste, the fossil fuel industry, industrial processes, and some agricultural processes. The greenhouse gas inventory sort of highlights, but doesn't include formally, fluxes from natural and working lands, from biomass combustion and forest sequestration, but it's not comprehensive. So that's where this carbon budget comes in, to look at all of those different sources and sinks of carbon. So what's the purpose of this? Really, we thought of it as a really important communication tool. It illustrates the importance of natural and working lands for Vermont's net emissions, and they, as we all know, so the power and importance of them and conserving them, puts things in context of our anthropogenic emissions and our natural and working lands. And I think what the key here is we haven't really discussed as a subcommittee and maybe as a broader climate council, I don't know, but what do we mean by net zero by 2050? What gets included in this? Are we comprehensive? What counts, right? So as it changes in stocks, are things like avoided emissions, substitution effects for using one thing over the other included? How do we measure it? How do we track it, right? What are the data limitations? So there's a lot to unpack here, but I think this is really important when we're sort of setting goals for net zero by 2050. What's included in the carbon budget? It's greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, also includes methane and nitrous oxide from what we call agriculture, forestry, and other land use sectors. So that's sort of a mouthful. We're calling it natural working lands. It covers all these sectors. So forests that have remained forests, forest land that's converted from forest to other uses or back to forest. So land use change includes harvested wood products. So biomass energy, biomass heat, wood products, includes wetlands and water bodies, includes agriculture, crops, hay, fertilizers, livestock and management, includes grassland, shrublands, as well as urban and developed lands. Although I will say this only includes trees in those areas. It doesn't include lawns or sort of other types of natural and working parts of the landscape. So this is a result of the carbon budget. I realize it's like terrible to give a table and a presentation, but we did make this yesterday afternoon. So bear with us for sort of the speed with which we had to prepare this, but this is the final table. This is in the document as well. I did notice, I don't know if Marion's still on the call, I don't think so, but I'm not sure that the carbon budget was posted online. If someone knows
doing it
that.
right now. Yeah,
awesome.
doing it right now.
Thank you, Jane. And one thing we did notice, Judson pointed it out. So we have all the sectors here. You can see, I guess here I can point, you can see here, and the net is bolded. We did notice a stock number actually is sort of incorrectly added up. It's about the same, it's a little over 2,000. I just want to flag that. But these estimated flux sums are correct. And so you can see over what we have for the most recent year of data is about a net when you of these natural and working lands of negative 2.91, and that's million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. You compare that to the fossil fuels, which is really that anthropogenic contribution from the greenhouse gas inventory, and sort of that comes to a positive 5.69 million metric tons. But lots to dive into here that we can't really get to in detail too much at this point. Ryan, I'm going to pass it to you for this slide you wanted to include. You're on mute, Ryan.
Talking to myself here. Could you back up to the slide prior
for
just a second? Yeah, there isn't an asterisk in the report, but I just wanted to raise for introduction to this this Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee that the agricultural sources or the agricultural category on this chart, pastures actually included in the grassland and shrublands category. So it's not all of the agricultural sector represented in that row, and just wanted to call that out. And then moving to the next slide, thanks, Allie. This is the tool that is used in the carbon budget to model emissions and sinks from agricultural operations and the sources that are presented on the chart here. Some of them are, static emissions with, for example, enteric fermentation per cow that can be adjusted, but just highlighting there's no management options available for that. Though we do know, of course, we're looking at actions and strategies that can influence that figure. But the one thing that I wanted to call out here specifically is with this emission inventory tool, we see within it the opportunity for management to influence emissions from agricultural cropland and pasture land. So we see here that depending on the management utilized, the AXAC tool can model either gross emissions or net sinks from that unit or acre of agricultural cropland that's managed based on a number of different inputs. So this is a bit more of a comprehensive take than what we've seen looking through the SIT tool that doesn't take into account management. And so I just wanted to highlight for this group some of the maximum ranges that can be found in the XAC tool that can be influenced by farmers' management of their cropland and pasture. Thanks.
Great. So this has been very quick. We're not sort of getting into some of the details, but I just wanted to point out some limitations to the Vermont carbon budget. So this is sort of a version 1.0. This is the first time we've done this as a state. This is really new and novel. We had a very limited time frame for compiling this budget. And so there's certainly things that could be improved, refined, and we plan, the hope is to do subsequent versions where we can build off what we have here. So I just want to say that. Then there's huge differences between the sectors of where the data comes from and the assumptions that accompany those data. So some sectors use Vermont-based data, like the forest sectors, but other sectors included here use data from maybe elsewhere in the United States, like the wetland data that's just then multiplied by our acreage of wetland, which may or may not be accurate. Some sectors have measured on the ground values, some are modeled. So just keeping that in mind, that they're not really super comparable between the sectors. And we didn't have time to explore data uncertainties around these values. So recognize that too. We're giving hard values for these, but there's probably there's certainly uncertainties around those numbers. So we don't know where that range is of those values. So, and that varies between these sectors. There's also time lag in some data sources. This has to do especially with on-the-ground measurements, like for forests. You'll see that the most recent year of data that I was able to find 2018, and I now have 2019 data, but we need a couple years of data to sort of compute those. And it also does not forecast into the future. It's really based on past data that we have, and it's really not even real time. So we can't say what's happening right at this moment. Last slide here, we're hoping to have discussion. We're not gonna have time for this, but I'm just gonna put these out there for next week or you all to think about as you read. Are there stocks and fluxes that were not accounted for in the budget? I've sort of identified a few. We maybe didn't capture fluxes between sectors. This can happen. An example of this is movement of carbon from land to water bodies. The urban and developed sector right now only includes trees. And I think really only above, I did this one, so I think it's only above ground biomass too of trees. So it doesn't include a lot of other factors there. And Ryan brought up that we're probably not capturing trees in agricultural land appropriately. So we'll have to think about that. There's likely some double counting as well. So there's some missed counting, but also double counting. So it's sort of confusing when we get land management like timber products, how we're accounting for those, and if we're double counting, like we might for land use change, we count that as an immediate source of emissions, but there's likely harvested wood products, maybe durable wood products that are harvested that are double counted in the harvested wood product sector. And then just thinking about what our next steps are from this carbon budget. I've mentioned we want to do subsequent versions to improve it. Ryan is interested in doing a request for proposals for emissions inventory research. And there's probably other next steps that this group can think about to build off this carbon budget. So that's all I have now, very fast, and I see we're at noon too. So I will stop sharing my screen.
And I know Kia had to jump off too. So maybe we talk briefly about next steps. And I know I don't know about a public comment as well. So we're at time, but I do want to go for about a few next steps as well.
Yeah, I think we have to do that. And then I'm happy to stay on for public comment if there is some. So I don't know, I might just look to Jane if you have any suggestions of kind of what we need to do. Obviously, we need to wrap up our list of actions. I feel like some of that work may need to happen independently between now and next week, but open to Abby, Jane, or Pat's thoughts on that.
Here's a few thoughts, and then you all weigh in. In terms of the matrix, as far as it's gone today, I will go in, and Marion just sent it to me what we just did today, and clean it up. Anything that, and get this right. And I think what was anything we kind of agreed to elevate, we're going to create just a green color for. We'll leave the other colors for things we haven't talked about yet. To Lauren's point, I think it's easy for me just to go back and look at, I have your individual score sheets. So where you scored medium across the board, I will do like a medium asterisk in the joint spreadsheet, and then stuff gets elevated, say from orange to yellow or whatever, I'll make those changes just automatically. So you guys don't have to do anything. I will take care of the medium rankings and just put a medium asterisk so we know that it's a slightly different medium, but it'll be treated the same in the coloring. And then I think the challenge will be that there will be some things we just haven't discussed yet. There was a lot of orange in some of these because I think people have or don't so much disagree as have a feeling about how much impact they would have or whether this is the right place for them in a climate plan. So we do need to talk about those. I do not want to take a second away from Kaya's time with you all next week on equity. And so the question is, how do we get to some of these other tabs we didn't get to today and really preserve the time for a rich equity discussion next week and not steal any time from that? Lauren, you have a question, so I think you should phrase it up because it's a fair one.
Oh, just Pat, I really appreciate you doing that. That sounds like a terrible task. But it also feels like a little bit of a stopgap measure for our subcommittee and doesn't necessarily like root out the fundamental issue that I was trying to raise, especially if it means some good actions are being overlooked within rural resilience and adaptation as well as cross-sector mitigation. So maybe that's something I just raised to steering committee or full council.
I guess I just don't, as I put in the point, I do think it was a fundamental oversight to not have all mediums carry across to medium. I put that in the chat and nobody caught that through the review at the subcommittee and steering committee level the first time. So we can certainly correct that. That's not a big deal. And I also think what I was trying to make the case for is it is somewhat mute because you have the discretion and flexibility to carry forward into the body of the plan any low or medium. But if the fact that the actions are coming across as low somehow makes you feel less supported in carrying it forward into the body of the plan, we can certainly clarify that. And there's some other clarity around prioritization and equity that I intend to do as well. So not a big deal. We can just clarify that was an oversight for everybody, but folks seem to be moving forward with their own discretion of carrying forward lows and mediums anyway. So
again, I think obviously Lauren as a council member, you certainly can raise it to the council for sure too.
Yeah, it just doesn't, it seems like we're not too far gone that if we're all admitting that there was an oversight that we could potentially fix it instead of just hoping that people look into their reviews and see a low was actually a medium. And the online form that had that table at the bottom only showed the rankings for medium and high. It didn't show what would amount to a low. So you had to kind of elucidate that. And I based on how many documents all of us are having to review while maintaining full-time jobs, it's just like, I wouldn't have thought to think about what a low would have meant. So
yeah, thank you for that. We can fix that. And I do just, as you think about next steps, I did just want to check in on quorum for next week's meeting because I know 2 of you will not be here already. So I do just want to check in since that is a conversation with Kaya and Kaya's time next week around making sure the rest of the subcommittee was going to join, is available.
Who's not going to be here next week? Billy and Lauren. Is anybody else not going to be here next week, next Friday? Charlie may be a little bit late, but he'll be here.
I may, I've got a conflict in, I've got something I'd like to leave early for, but so I may be on till 11.
So maybe we need to make sure we're doing the core work 9:30 to 11. And I don't know, maybe there's some other less core, I don't know whether we can talk informally without quorum. I'm not sure how that works. Co-chair, this may be something, any quick thoughts on this one?
I don't know. It seems like the equity stuff is some of the really important things, and looks like we just need to make it happen between 9 to 11.
I have a question about quorum. Does quorum mean you can't meet, or does quorum mean you can't decide? Those are 2 different things.
I don't think we should be using this time for this conversation. Okay. We're well over. Folks need to go. We've got public who need to comment. We can figure it out.
Right. That's
so what are we going to do between now and next week to move the prioritization forward? We're going to recirculate the list. Pat's going to change the mediums, the lows to mediums based on the glitch and the prioritization. And then do folks want to just share their kind of any comments on that updated list via email, and we'll try to incorporate those into a final version that we can circulate in advance of next week's meeting. Is that a process that works for people?
I think that's probably going to be what we're going to have to do. So I will get something out to you all early next week, and with maybe a little bit of instruction about kind of further clarification I would need to make further refinements given your all's feedback about things that aren't elevated that should be. There's a bunch of orange, which I may just say, look, I'm going to turn orange into green unless someone wants to tell me specifically, no, I picked a low because I don't like it. And so we'll have to figure that one out. Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, anything else that members, Jane or Pat, want to bring to this group before we move on to a last opportunity for public comment? Okay, are there any members of the public who would like to share some thoughts? Annette, Jennifer, let's see if anyone else. Cheryl. Okay, great. Let's and Zach, great. Well, let's try to go in that order. We're always willing to take written comments as well, folks. If you've got more you want to share with us, then the time allows. So Annette, take it away.
I want to offer an observation. Yours is not the only subcommittee I've been following, and I've been watching the full council meetings. One of the earliest council meetings got presentations from other states, all of which pointed out that no state has ever done what you've been tasked to do in the time frame allotted. It's evident that you don't have enough time to do what you need to do. And so I'm suggesting, especially with this subcommittee, that you make that clear. I mean, one of the recommendations from the person in Massachusetts was be realistic. And just seeing that carbon budget today for the first time, I realized, wow, there's all these consultants that have been hired, none of whose work has really been seen by anybody in any of these subcommittees yet. And I'm concerned by some of the things I'm seeing in your recommendations that, oh, now I'm going to have to fight them in the legislature. I just want to raise this very large process point that this climate council has been asked to do too much work in too short a period of time. And if there are areas where your subcommittee feels that you have not had the time to address it, whether it's equity or land use, that you highlight those in your, that you create a space for your recommendations that eventually go to the climate council, that eventually go to the legislature, that we ran out of time. We feel we didn't have enough time. I just think you need to be honest and realistic about what this process is doing. You're coming up to real crunch. You're already way beyond crunch time. And I can feel the stress in every committee I watch. So take that for what it's worth, but that's my observation as a realist and a pragmatist.
If I may just respond really quickly to that, Annette, I really appreciate you putting that out there. And I'm not sure you were on the public comment where I said this, but it is my intention to try to write that into the narrative, particularly around the inability of us to do this equitably on this timeline, which, as you've heard, a number of us have raised this from the very beginning. The other thing that I would encourage members of the public who have been alongside this process for the entirety is that your concerns are, we need the legislature to hear this as well. This was a deadline that was not created by those of us who are trying to do the best that we can managing full-time jobs and the work that was asked of us with not enough time. And so I think there's also going to come a point where we're going to need kind of the public support to say, I fear that there's going to come a moment where there's a blame game that happens regarding what we haven't been able to do. And, I'm going to need your support at that moment to say, well, I've been watching this and I think that they're really trying, but they didn't have enough time. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I'm certainly going to try to call that out in how we write out our narrative, but would also welcome members of the public to give that feedback to the legislature as well.
And you might want to watch that video of the very early meeting where they got the presentations, where it was clear, 2 years, 5 years, it was said, nobody's done it in a year.
Oh, I remember well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Annette. Jennifer.
I just wanted to say I'm really excited to see the work that went into the carbon budget. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to is a discussion of soil carbon next week, and just to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Cheryl.
Oh, hi. I want to say that as Annette said, I don't remember when it was, but I have given a suggestion to this also to the subcommittee in the past, like Annette brought up about adding a recommendation in the very beginning that this work needs to continue, and this is just the first step. And Abby, thank you very much. I think you heard that, or other people said it also. And also know that I will be there to support everybody in saying that there's not enough time here, nor enough people, and working on this extremely important work that so many are so qualified for. And you all, and it needs to be, there needs to be so much more work done. So let me again be really brief and first say, please save the chat again and look at the chat, because there are comments in there from various people that, I try to save it and forget to hit save chat at the very end. Otherwise you'd only get the first bit, but you guys, there's a lot of good information in there that I think isn't always addressed. Okay. It is great work, that carbon budget. I think it's wonderful, and it's amazing to be doing that amount of work in that short amount of time. I also, and I appreciate everybody's everything, and I don't make it known like most people do, but I really do appreciate it. And I don't mean only to pick out the mistakes, or not the mistakes, but the things I have issue with, because so much good is being done. But I just apologize, but why does it say net zero by 2050? This is not what we all know is necessary. Is that are we doing net zero by 2050? Like, we all know that is too little too late. So anyway, okay. Comments on energy generation and land use. Oh, so much land use work. Energy generation can't be screwing up our land use, and everything that comes from all the mistakes that we've done in the past and continue to make with regard to land use. I think that we need to get an action into all of the language, such as I can't even remember, it's in the chat somewhere. And a very important action is to fund municipalities on education and or enforcement and or whatever else is feasible to make these things happen. So many things are really valuable that just aren't happening. For example, food waste. That's already regulated, but so many people and entities are not doing it. And that's because there's a lack of education and there's a lack of regulation. And I think if we get regulation into all sorts of stuff, including other things that were brought up here today, like a general action or strategy, or wherever you want to fit it in, would be give municipalities and or whatever entity it is that you want to give it to the funding. And this action is to fund regulation or education, or both. I mean, and, not or.
Thanks, Cheryl.
One more thing, please.
Sure.
downtown, land use, development in already developed areas, and river corridors, all of that. That can happen. And I put an offer in there that I am happy and willing and would like to work with others, because you need to get into the room together, planners, landscape architects, ecologists, and to work on that, because we can fix and encourage development downtown in village centers, traditional village areas, and also respect the riparian buffers and river corridors and the movement that rivers need to do, and streams, et cetera. So I think, we just need to figure out some time when a group of us can get together and talk about that, and then go back and do the land use thing. You have expertise that is available, and those 5 people need to sit down together and do that and work on that part. So
Thank you.
there's more, but thank you very much.
Thanks. Zach, go ahead. All right.
Hey, everybody.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
I'm sorry, it just took me a second to get the screen on. I'll keep this very brief. I know you're all justifiably worn out after another long meeting. Thanks for all of your good work today. I have to say, I'm leaving this meeting feeling more hopeful than I was at the outset. I'm really grateful to you, Billy, and to Abby, and to Charlie, and to Lauren, and to others for adding back in some, or I should say maybe elevating some of the action items that seem to be kind of strangely going down on the priority list. When I was looking at the spreadsheet this morning, those that target the restoration of our native ecosystem here in Vermont. And we talked a bit about old forests, not really all that much, and the value of intact wetlands and whatnot. But I want to just say this just really simply and clearly, that when we talk about old forests, when we talk about healthy wetlands, when we talk about all of those ecosystems, we're talking about restoring the native ecosystems. So old forests, maybe that sounds exceptional in some way, but really what we're talking about here is getting back to, ecosystems that we once had in abundance here, and something that we have so very little of today. And so I, really appreciate that, that vision that's in Vermont conservation design, that Forest Parks and Recreation and Vermont Fish and Wildlife and so many others, contributed to and produced a couple of years ago, that we're elevating that with this plan. So I, just wanted to say thanks for making sure that those at least seem to be getting their due now. And I'm looking forward to seeing them in the next version of the spreadsheet or recommendations that come out before the next meeting. And I'm also, I think I heard that the carbon budget's going to come up again next week. I hope that is the case. I would love to have some more kind of robust discussion about that and hear more about the methodologies and what the kind of projections are that were included in that carbon budget, or scenarios that we could follow are. So hopeful that will be a part of a future conversation as well before a draft is submitted. But thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks, Zach. Barring any other comment from the public or members of the subcommittee or staff, I think we're adjourned. Hearing none. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.